We'll see if that is in fact true. Sure, I can see everything you all say to me. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome to my medieval cooking party. I am the Contessa of the Creative Contessa, and today we're going to be exploring some vegan/vegetarian recipes from the 15th century specifically, 14th and 15th century specifically, because we are in the Lenten season. This is the season of Lent, the 40 days preceding Easter, when Christians across the world of many different denominations observe a period of fasting and relative abstinence. And in the Middle Ages, this was a very strict period of fasting and abstinence that came with a whole special modified menu. Therefore, we will be exploring some of those options, which also happen to work very well for those of you who adhere to a vegetarian diet and even a vegan diet, because to be frank, with the exception of the inclusion of fish and seafood, the medieval Lenten foods on Ember Day, are in fact vegan. They even issue ingredients like butter and cheese. So yeah. So welcome. How's everyone doing this evening? Yeah, so excited for this. Well, I've got some things planned for us today. So I'm just going to finish by putting on my kerchief, my kuffia, as it might have been called, possibly in 15th century Italian. We will actually be exploring a couple of different 15th century cuisines today. We will be exploring English cuisine. We will be exploring two English recipes and a plethora of recipes from Rome in the 15th century. So we're going to be doing a north and south sort of situation here. Let's see. Here we go. Okay, nice. Right. So let us talk about our sources for the first couple of, let's see where my teacup went. Let us talk about the sources for the first couple of recipes that we will be exploring. In essence, we have two sources from which we're working today. We have one that's actually the end of the 14th century, the 1390s specifically, referred to as a forma of uva curi, which just means a style of cooking, a form of cuire. Curry is not curry, but from the 14th century French word cuire, which means to cook. And it's basically a forma of curry. Curry is just the hideous Anglicization, bastardization of the French. And this is actually a cookbook. It's not a book even, it's a scroll. It's a proper scroll where you actually unroll it like this to read it. It's beautiful. It is gorgeous. And it was written for Richard II. It was composed for Richard II. It is supposedly composed by his head cook, therefore containing the haute cuisine of the English court of the end of the 14th century. And of course, Richard II met with a very tragic fate. He was deposed because he was basically a little tyrant, even by the standards of his own day, which should tell you something. So he was deposed by his cousin, and Henry Bolingbroke, who would become Henry IV. And then he eventually died of mysterious circumstances, but most historians think that he was just left to starve to death, which probably actually means he was left to die of dehydration first. So yeah, his end is kind of tragic, but during his lifetime, he had a relatively splendid court because he was an erudite and literate and very cultured king. And so he, under his what am I trying to say? During his reign, basically, he promoted a host of artists, including famous names like Geoffrey Chaucer. And so, his reign had a positive side in terms of cultural flourishing in 14th century England, but it had a real negative side in terms of his interactions with his nobles. And he was also an asshole when it came to the lower classes as well. See his behavior in the Peasants' War, the Peasants' Revolt, which is, I think historians are working to change the name of the Peasants' Revolt, because honestly, it's a terrible name and it doesn't really capture what it's all about at all. Yeah, so So welcome everyone. If you are new to my medieval cooking party, we are going to be reading through original recipes together, step by step, and then determining what sort of process we should take, what sort of approach we should take to make these recipes. So the first thing we're actually going to do is a recipe we started working on over a month ago, and we're finally going to finish it. And this is actually a fritter. And this is not a vegan fritter. It is vegetarian. It's not vegan. It technically does not fall within the Lenten celebration because it does have eggs. But I made the dough for it, the paste, a month ago, and so I really want to use it and finish experimenting with this recipe. So we're going to give it a try. Yep. Let me see. Lenten, not lentils. Hi, it's not lentils. Lenten, Lenten, of the Lent season. Lent being the season, a season of fasting, 40 days, and it's supposed to commemorate the 40 days that Jesus spent in the desert, struggling with temptation that was presented to him by Satan, after which he would then enter his public ministry. And historically, many churches place the observance of this 40 days of basically privation in the desert in the lead up to the Easter rites, the Passion of Christ, and then, of course, the death and resurrection. Yep. Yeah, it is a bit like Ramadan. Yeah, so Lent is like Ramadan in the sense of it's a long period of fasting. Unlike Ramadan, though, where you do what I call a hard fast every day, basically from sunrise to sunset. Lent is not a situation where you eat nothing. It's where you eat less and you observe any kinds of foods that may stimulate the passions. So therefore, meat is considered a kind of food stuff that will stimulate the passions. And so during the 40 days of Lent, you should eat no meat, you should eat no animal products, no cheese, technically no eggs, no butter. I know, no butter, everyone. How hard is that? And people who would celebrate it in the Middle Ages at what I call the advanced level of Lenten fasting, would be very ascetic and would maybe only drink water and eat only bread for the duration of the 40 days. But just like humans will human, and there are people who observe the spirit of Lent, and then there are the people who observe the letter of the law. And the letter of the law can change over time. And so, for instance, across the Middle Ages, as the Middle Ages progress and as Christianity develops, whatever you want to call it, moves away from further and further from its origins, then the Pope starts passing rules, new strictures about what counts as a fish. And so basically anything that lives in the water suddenly at one point is considered to be a fish, and you can eat fish during Lent. So beavers suddenly count as fish, waterfowl count as fish. So so how strictly it gets observed, how much it really is observed in a manner that aligns with this idea of privation and suffering, to recognize the suffering under which Jesus went in the desert. Yeah, there's some people definitely in the Middle Ages who missed the point and missed it hard. Yeah, so good question. Who is the Pope currently? The Pope is Leo. We have Pope Leo currently. I really like him. But the Pope is was the head of the Church, capital C, in the Middle Ages in Western Europe, and what we would now call the Catholic Church, but before the Reformation in Western Europe was just the Church. So he's supposed to be St. Peter's heir. He is supposed to be, in the hierarchy, it goes the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, and then the Pope, according to medieval theories of papal power, sort of, depending on what part of the Middle Ages you're talking about. But in essence, the Pope is the head of the Catholic Church now, was the head of the church, the medieval church, but also was a warrior prince in and of himself, because the Pope used to control massive lands. So what is now the Vatican City, that used to be half of Italy, actually, and was under direct control of the Pope. Yeah, good questions. Let me see. Okay. Great. So let's go ahead and look at the first recipe that we're going to be finishing. Okay. So the first recipe, well, this one is from yet another source. This one comes from an anonymous book of cookery from the 15th century in England, and it is therefore written in an English that is sort of the transition from Middle English to Modern English. And because the Middle English is so fun, I will first read it to you in the original English with the original English pronunciation, and then we will go back through the recipe and discuss what it is exactly we're going to do and how we're going to interpret it. Yep. Right, so the recipe is called Petit Pernontes, Tacka fere flour, sucra, saffron and salt, and maka thereof fere pasta and fere koffinges. Then take fere I trid 3 yolkes roll, and sucra, and powdered ginger, and sonis of corons, and minced dates, but not too small. Then cast all this on a fair bowl and mele all together is, and put in thin coffin and let bake over frie in fresh grace. Okay, welcome to 15th century English, everyone. Right, okay, so in modern English. Take fair flour, sugar, saffron, and salt, and make thereof a fair paste and fair coffins. Then take 3 raw egg yolks, separated, and sugar, and ginger powder, and currants, raisins of currant, and minced dates, but not minced too small. Then mix this all in a fair bowl and put it in a thin coffin and either let it bake or fry it in fresh grease. Okay, so here is what we've already done. The part we started over a month ago. I made the paste. We made the paste a month ago. And this paste, some of you know, I do not eat grains generally, and I avoid gluten pretty much always. So I made this out of an alternative flour that is not medieval European. I made this out of cassava flour, which is a root that grows in the Pacific Islands, basically originally. So we may be facing some challenges with this, but in essence, it looks the same because it's a white flour. So we have flour, and we should talk about the word fair. So fair flour, fair in 15th century English can mean clean, as in the fair bowl. It can also mean pale, white, which means that this flour should have the bran bolted out of it, sifted out of it. So you don't want whole grain for this particular application. Right? So take fair flour, sugar, and saffron and salt, and make it into a paste. So we did that. A paste. Paste is where the word pastry comes from. It's also where this shares the exact same root as pasta. And in fact, in pre-modern Italian, 15th century Italian and 14th century Italian, the word pasta is used dually for both pie dough, as we would call it, pastry dough, as well as pasta, like the thing that is cut and boiled and then eaten with a sauce. And that's because basically it's the same process. It's just a question of how you make your paste, you know, and then what you do to it after you make the paste. But basically they are the same thing. Yeah. 6 a.m. cooking. Tomakor, good morning. Comment, Old English sounds so melodic compared to the modern day. Yeah, so Old English, so that was Middle English. Old English sounds like someone is choking while they're speaking, because Old English is very guttural. If you actually hear Beowulf in the original because that's Old English, it is a fascinating listen, but it is hard. It's like, it makes modern German actually sound delicate. So yeah, Middle English, by contrast, is definitely a softer and more melodic language because it's had so much influence from French at that point. Okay. Let me see. Okay, so here we have our paste. And it says that we should make the fair paste, which we did, and make fair coffins. Coffin, this is going to trip some of you up. The word coffin, yes, modernly it refers to the container for a corpse. But in Middle English and even early modern English, coffin just means a basically pie crust that can stand on its own. So it is something that if you made it up, it could actually stand on its own in the oven, for instance. So by making these coffins, then we are basically making a receptacle for our filling. So we're going to go ahead and make our coffins, and it doesn't say how to do this. So there's different ways we could do this. I could just, if I wanted, I could, for instance, use my hands to smush out the dough and then make some kind of really rough hand pie. But I'm going to go ahead and actually roll it into a slightly, because it says later on, it says put it in a thin coffin. So we know that we want this paste to be relatively thin. So for that, I'm going to say that we should be rolling it out. And there are medieval recipes that actually do specify to roll out your coffin, to roll out your paste. So just because this recipe doesn't specify to roll it out, doesn't mean that it's not implied in the understanding of this recipe. And this is one of the biggest challenges of interpreting historical recipes, especially medieval recipes, because they don't include everything you need to know, I think intentionally, in fact, but there's a lot of knowledge that is assumed. It is assumed that you, as someone reading this recipe, will already basically know the process for making a petit penant, because you will have already eaten it. These recipes, before the printing press, before the 16th century, cookbooks are not really, they're not instruction manuals so much as resumes that the cooks who have compiled them, and nearly always it's a cook who has compiled it, have compiled together, and generally they're presenting it as a gift to some very powerful, very wealthy aristocrat in the hopes that that aristocrat will hire them. So the point of such a compilation is basically it's a portfolio of the dishes that this cook can make for you. If you would read it and then decide, oh yes, I would like these delicious dishes, but there aren't actually enough details to successfully make the recipe. There's little important steps that have been left out. And the more I look through these compilations of recipes, the more I really believe that the details have been left out on purpose to basically say, look, here's the basics of what this dish would contain, but if you want it to be a success, you're going to have to hire me to make it for you. Okay, let me just check the comments. Okay. I look like an actress in a web series. Okay, I guess. But I'm real. I'm a real person. I'm not AI, in case anyone is wondering. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and roll this out. Put my little pot of tea off to the side. I'm going to roll this out into what is referred to as a thin paste. A thin coffin. Thin pasta. And that's the other thing. The word paste in 15th century English or 14th century English would have actually been pronounced pasta, which for those of you who are pasta lovers will recognize as such. So you can really hear the connection between the word paste and pasta in its older form. And I'm rolling this between 2 layers of fine linen, because I find that will give me much more success in rolling out a nice thin paste, as it were. Okay, so we've rolled out our paste. Now, there's a couple of things that I don't have, because this is, always check your oven. One thing, I don't have a medieval oven. A medieval oven would have actually been, because it actually says latbaka. So a medieval oven would have been like a brick pizza oven, except that unlike a brick pizza oven, which these days people actually still have fire, most brick oven pizza places will actually have like a pile of wood and fire in the back. No. It's not how most ovens worked in pre-modern Europe. And by pre-modern, I mean pre-20th century Europe, because many communities in Europe still have their old communal ovens, right? So the way a medieval oven would have worked is, of course, it's like this brick structure with mortar or with a daub, a clay. And what you would do is you would actually build a fire in it to heat it up. Let the fire rage, get it really hot, and then you would scrape all of the wood out, all of the burning, the ash and the fire and the coals out once it had reached temperature, usually once the fire's actually kind of burnt itself down. You'd scrape that all out, and then the oven would retain the heat from the fire for a long time, and then you bake things in the oven. So there's actually no fire in the oven when your foodstuffs are in there, which will reduce the chance of burning or uneven heating, because hypothetically, the whole oven has heated evenly, which is certainly not much like our modern ovens. Modern ovens definitely have spots of where it's hotter and colder. For those who think if you think your oven is evenly heated all the way through, you are either you have a really expensive high-tech oven or you're delusional. So I don't have a medieval oven here. I don't have access to one. I have made medieval ovens myself, actually. I have stomped in a combination of grass, horse poo, and mud to make the daub. I have woven the wattle frame. I have made it all together. We fired it, and I've baked things in it at a medieval living history event. And it's really gratifying, but I don't have that here. So we're just going to use my modern oven, which brings me to my point of always remember to look in your oven before you turn it on.
Question.
Yes, question.
Doesn't it stick to the linen, or is the paste not sticky?
The paste is not sticky. I don't know if you all saw, but when I lifted the linen off, it came off no problem. See, like so. If you are concerned about your paste sticking to your linen, just dust it with some flour before you start rolling it, and that will definitely prevent it from sticking. I was not concerned about this one sticking though, because I just know it's so this dough was relatively wet actually, so I kind of knew that it was going to be fine. But if you're concerned about your dough sticking to your cloth when you use a cloth to roll it out, then just dust it with flour top and bottom, roll, and you'll be fine. And I always use, there's a lot of modern recipes that call for using plastic wrap, which I think is garbage. You should not use plastic wrap unless you have absolutely nothing better for it, because plastics are highly destructive to the environment and they're single-use items. I use cloths for that purpose, for rolling things out. Yeah. Okay, questions or comments? Nope. Okay, great. So I'm just going to set this aside for now. And we're going to work on the filling for our...
Oh, K-Meeks. I've seen them on here before.
Yep.
They just said that.
Oh, K-Meeks, welcome back. Lovely to see you. Okay, so we're going to now get to mixing our ingredients. So unfortunately, I don't have here with me in our vacation apartment in Korea much of my medieval equipment, or even things that act like medieval equipment. I do have replica medieval mixing bowls that are ceramic. This is not one of them. They did not have metal mixing bowls in the Middle Ages, just putting that out there. So what does the recipe say? The recipe says... until you could go to sleep. Okay, so now we're to the filling. It says, take takkafere itrid, yolkis roll, an sugra, and pura ginger, and rosins of corons, and minced datas, but not too small. Right. Okay, so you're going to notice that there's a couple of things completely missing from this recipe. Not only timings, but quantities. And this is where we basically have to sort of make it up as we go along and decide how much we're going to be, making, how much you should take of the egg yolks relative to the raisins and the dates. What's our ratio? Well, I have made what we might call pasties, right? Modernly known as pasties or hand pies. I've made plenty in my life, and so I kind of have an idea of what a different ratio of egg yolks to filling is going to do. The egg yolks here are going to be functioning not just as a flavor enhancer, because it's just the yolks, you'll notice. It's not the eggs, or not the whole eggs, so there's no egg whites. And that's intentional, I'm pretty certain, because egg whites would give it a whole different texture. And you'd end up more with a scrambled egg effect or an egg pie effect, whereas just using the yolks are full of a compound called lecithin, which is a flavor, it's a texturizer, that's the word I'm looking for. It's a texturizer. So it's going to lend a creamy, smooth texture to our filling. Of course, yolks are pure fat, basically, with a whole bunch of micronutrients in them if your chickens live a healthy life. And so the fat is, of course, a flavor enhancer and will boost the flavors from the ginger and the raisins, the currants. And I just realized we are going to need a little bit of sugar. If you could just get me out the sugar, handsome. Yep. Okay, so how much, egg yolk to filling? I'm going to actually go with 2 egg yolks to here, and you'll see this is the amount of dough we have. It's not terribly much. I think I'm going to get two coffins out of this, so we're not going to be making much. This is more of a test in any case. But the first thing we have to do is separate out our yolks from our whites, and there are many, many, many medieval recipes that utilize just the yolks. And there are very few recipes, by contrast, that utilize just the whites. When I find a recipe that utilizes just whites in a medieval source, I grow very excited. But yolks have plenty of other functions in both in the kitchen and outside the kitchen in the medieval world, whether or not that's specified in actual cookbooks. So one of the things that you can do with egg whites, and you can do this modernly as well for those who don't know it, if you make a broth, and your broth is a little funky, like if you make a bone broth and your bone broth is a little funky, maybe it smells a little musty and you don't like that, I don't, then actually if you put egg whites into your broth and cook it and then strain out the egg whites will actually take out all of those unpleasant flavors and will take out the unpleasant muck and will clarify your broth. And we do know that there are some medieval sources that actually talk about utilizing egg whites to clarify broths. Also, egg whites could also be used in the medieval world for in art. They were actually used to make glaire. And glaire is basically a component in painting, in either whether it's illumination or if you're painting on canvas or on fresco or on cloth. And glaire is basically stale egg white. It's fermented egg white, and it helps bind the pigment and to the work. So I could well see that a kitchen would actually collect up the egg whites and then sell them to the local painter's studio or the local illuminator's studio. There's actually quite a few practical uses for egg whites that go beyond just eating them. So, it's not necessarily surprising that medieval people wanted to focus on the delicious, creamy egg yolks, Okay, comments or questions? Let me see. Just home from the woods. This topic is making me hungry for breakfast. Yeah. Did you go camping, or were you hunting or foraging? There's lots of fun things that one can do in the forest. So whisks. Let's talk about whisks. Whisks, like we understand them, did not exist in either the Middle Ages or the Renaissance. A whisk being, all those different wires making this balloon-like thing. The closest thing to a whisk and the earliest discussion of using a whisk in the kitchen that I have found is the early 16th century, and it's not a whisk, it's a stick, where you clean the stick and you split the end of the stick into four strips, basically, and then you use that to whip up egg whites and whipped cream, actually, for a dish called snow. And so I could have done that, and actually I did mean to do that. We actually have an apricot tree that's blooming, and I meant to go and switch off a branch from the apricot tree and turn that into a medieval version of a whisk so you could see how it actually works. But on the other hand, you can actually get quite a nice effect even with just a spoon. Nice and creamy. And, that's something this recipe completely lives out. Again, it doesn't say anything about order of operations. Should we mix the egg yolks first? But my experience cooking is that your outcomes are going to be far better if you first whip your eggs, egg whites, egg yolks, or eggs whole. If you first whip them before adding anything else, you're going to get a much better outcome. You're going to get a better texture. You're going to get better distribution of your egg. It's going to be a much more delicious result. So this is, again, one of those situations where we have to read in between the lines, in some cases literally, in these medieval recipes. Yeah. Okay. Look how nice and creamy that looks. Yeah. Okay, we're going to set that aside for now, getting to the next part. Okay, or not, we're going to go ahead and mix this in. So then it says, take flera separated yolks raw, done that, and sugar. Now, again, it doesn't say how much sugar, but here's what we know about sugar in the 15th century. This, especially the early 15th century in England, as it was pronounced in 15th century English. Sugar was an extreme luxury item, and it was not yet being used in any sorts of large quantities. It was being used almost the same way that salt was used, to enhance the flavor, but not really or only rarely utilized in enough quantity to actually make something sweet. We also know that the rest of the filling contains two extremely sweet ingredients. We've got raisins and dates, which are basically little sugar bombs. I mean, yes, it's a so-called natural whole sugar, it's fruit, but even still, lots of sweetness here. So we don't really need a lot of sugar to make this sweet. So I'm going to interpret this as meaning more like about a teaspoon of sugar. Right? Not much, not much. And yes, so some of you have asked me about sugar, and you've asked me, white sugar, is that medieval? Because of course your assumption, like most people's assumption, is that before the Industrial Revolution, everyone ate whole grain everything. It was, you know, the rawest version of all of our ingredients. But the reality is that medieval people, especially at the upper end echelon of society, were very fond of refined foods. And so the typical bread, for instance, for the nobility, it was white. It was sourdough, but it was still white. It was all the bran had been removed. It was referred to as pain de main. And so the aristocrats were actually getting very little nutrition, micronutrition from their food anyway, relative to the peasants who were eating whole grain sourdough bread and who were not eating any kind of sugar, most likely, at most maybe a little bit of honey every now and then. And the same thing applies to sugar. These recipes often specify fair sugar, fair meaning white, meaning purified, meaning all of the things that could impact the flavor in any way removed. And unfortunately, a lot of people think that, you know, well, the molasses, you must then be able to take the molasses and do something with it. Well, the molasses that we now get undergoes a chemical process to make it the way it is. Raw molasses, the raw drippings just from the sugar, as it would have been in the Middle Ages, were apparently very unpleasantly bitter. And that's actually the word molasses means bitter honey. I think if I recall correctly. So it was not something that was pleasant. It was not something people wanted to use in their food. And it's one of the reasons you'd never, ever, ever see a culinary use for molasses in Europe. No one wanted it. It was a waste product, and it was considered, sometimes even medieval people decided it was better to just waste things than consume them. Now, what I have wondered is if there was some other industrial use for molasses from the brown syrupy part of the sugar refining process, and I haven't been able to discover any yet. So if you know of a medieval use for the part of the sugar that was refined away, the brown part, the brown syrupy part that was refined away, let me know. I'd be very interested to hear that. No, I have found no evidence. No, rum is not a medieval thing at all. Rum doesn't even make an appearance until the 17th century. No documentation for it before that. So rum is definitely not one of the things that they were doing in the Middle Ages with the brown off drippings of the sugar making process. Okay, so here we go.
Say hi to people and Mason.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. If you're just joining, welcome to my medieval cooking party. We are today in the early 15th century. Mason, thank you for joining us. Good morning.
And Form of Curie is the product tagged right now.
Oh, okay. Oh, right. If it's the printed book, not the original scroll, I assume.
Yeah, it's a book.
Right. Okay. If you are interested in purchasing a published and legible version of one of the sources from which we're cooking today, a form of curry, we've tagged it as one of the products attached to this live stream. If you go to the shopping tab, I think.
That one they should see in the upper right hand
Or you
corner.
see it up in the upper right hand corner. If you decide you would like to purchase this book and you do from that link, then I actually do get a commission. So it is a way to support my channel. Just being completely frank about that. YouTube pays us garbage, actually, when it comes to these live streams. We get a pathetic share of what YouTube actually earns from everything we do. So all the little extras that you guys send my way really help me keep going. Okay, so we have the sugar. Oh, happy, thank you. Yeah, so for those who don't know, I like sharing, I like learning myself, and I like sharing my knowledge, and I like sharing my knowledge in a way that makes it accessible for everyone and interesting and exciting. History is interesting. History is exciting. History is the story of our of the world, of our species, of our ancestors. It's the most fantastic drama ever written, and yet it is normally presented in schools in the most tediously dull and unrelatable way that makes everyone hate history. But you shouldn't. If you enjoy watching, TV shows, movies, if you enjoy reading fiction, you should enjoy history, because history is often more stranger than fact, or stranger than fiction. History is real bizarre and real weird and real exciting, and yet it's never presented in that kind of way. So part of my mission in life is to present history, to teach history in a way that makes people love it as much as I do. So I hope today's cooking party helps you get more interested in medieval life, material culture, and food, and how to make food. And maybe you can take some lessons away from today's cooking show that you can apply in your own modern cooking, because I'm big into cooking science. I enjoy the science of the chemistry of cooking and baking, and also the nutritional aspect of all these foodstuffs as well. Okay, so we've added our sugar. I'm just going to give this a taste. It's not sweet. It's just sweet enough that the yolk is has a little more roundness to it, shall we say? Okay, so you can call me Autumn. Okay, Autumn, I will call you that. Thank you for letting me know. Great. So next up is puder gingera. So ginger. This is ginger powder. Powdered ginger is very potent, so tread carefully. Ginger is one of the most common spices in these medieval cookbooks. And I should specify that the recipes that have survived, 99% of them are aristocratic or wealthy recipes. This is not the way everyone ate on a daily basis. The majority of people ate on a daily basis, because these spices were insanely expensive and were extreme luxury items, because they were imported from the other side of the Eurasian continent. So that means that they were really, it was truly conspicuous consumption, because you were literally consuming this very expensive thing into your body, a single-use item. Unlike clothing as a form of conspicuous consumption, you can wear the same dress multiple times. You can only eat the ginger once, or you should only eat the ginger once, maybe I should say. So powdered ginger is one of the probably most common ways, or dry ginger is probably one of the most common ways that ginger would have reached Europe. It would have been most likely to have arrived as a whole root, though, a dried ginger root. And then it would be ground fresh there as needed. So they wouldn't have shipped powdered ginger from India or from Thailand, well, Siam as was, or Lana as was, all the way, or Ayutthaya as was, all the way to the Europe. They would have shipped the dried root. But we do know for a fact that even in London, they had access to fresh ginger root, which would have been an extra luxury. Dried ginger root would have been expensive, fresh ginger root way more. But I have records of fresh ginger in London in the 14th and 15th century. So first, there was someone who said, no, you can't possibly use fresh ginger in these recipes. It's not true. In fact, there's one recipe from 14th century England, from a form of curry, that specifies that you should peel and grate the ginger. Peeling and grating a dried ginger root, I dare you to try it. You're going to be very frustrated and you're going to hate life. I tried it. It's not terribly feasible, and it doesn't make sense as a set of instructions for dried ginger. It makes sense, though, as a set of instructions for fresh ginger root. Anyway, back to the topic of this petite pernant. Yes, Handsome?
No, good.
Okay.
You've got questions.
Oh, do I? Okay, yeah, questions.
Now, have you heard of Tryon Palace?
Tryon Palace?
Tryon.
I have not heard of Tryon Palace,
It's a
actually.
historic site in North Carolina, the first state capital.
I have not heard of Tryon Palace. Is it one of those pieces of architecture that a robber baron transported over at the end of the 19th century? We have lots of those in America.
Looks interesting. But the next question is, so would the lower echelons of society would have eaten much more bland food, broths and such?
Okay, that is a valid question. In fact, today, some of the recipes we're exploring from Rome are definitely recipes for the lower ends of actually not even the lower end. We're talking the 80% of society. socioeconomically speaking, in terms of earnings and income and assets. No, so that's a big myth about medieval food, that for most people it was just bland. But you don't need spices, and let me be clear. There is an important distinction between spices and herbs, and there's a difference in meaning. Spices are roots and seeds and bark, basically. And they generally they tend to come from somewhere else if you're in Europe. Herbs are green things. And herbs they grow everywhere. Everywhere has its own has its own local flora that are edible, that you can just go out and harvest, that will lend a wide array of flavors to your food. And all over Europe, there are so many herbs that grow everywhere that are absolutely delicious. And actually, I would say that medieval peasants had a more varied flavor profile than we do on average in the West, in European and American cooking now, excluding cooking that has, imported Indian and Thai and, South American cuisines and whatnot. But if you're looking about European food in its roots, modern European food is dull, boring, flavorless compared to even medieval peasant cuisine, because we have stopped using so many herbs that in the Middle Ages would have just been common. Give you some examples: sorrel, hyssop, summer savory, burnet. Most people don't even know what those are, let alone would they use them in their cuisine on a daily basis. So the 80% of society would have had access to fresh herbs that would have grown wild. They would have just gone out and harvested them. There was no crime in going out and harvesting wild herbs, right? And people would have had their own little herb patches. Most people would have. Right. Also, you could take those herbs and you can dry them. So you could have them all throughout the year. They don't even need to be in season. But also, what is in season will change. So the fresh herbs to which people would have had access would have changed on maybe every month or so. So even though the 80% probably generally ate some kind of stew and bread every day for every meal, with occasionally with roasts or something like that on holy days, on feast days, the components of those stews would have changed with the season. So, when in the spring you'll have different kinds of stews than you can have in the summer, than you can have in the fall, than you can have in the winter. So no, the diet of even the bottom 80%, which would have been the majority of society, socioeconomically speaking, across most of Europe, even their food would not have been bland. It would have been very interesting, especially to a modern palate, which would not be used to all of those herbs.
But what about monks? Do they at times have access to those same ingredients, even though they were not nobles?
Oh, goodness. Monastic community. Twitchy, are you out there? So there's this myth, another myth, that monks were somehow an impoverished lot, but by the high Middle Ages, a lot of the monastic communities had become very rich and were no longer living an ascetic lifestyle. So we actually, a meta study actually just came out that examined the diets of monks based on the skeletons that they found in monks in the cemeteries in a variety of monastic communities. And what they found is that they ate a very rich diet. They were very well nourished. And, even though there were plenty of days when they were supposed to be fasting, avoiding all of these luxurious items, there were plenty of days when they weren't. And many members of the monastic communities, especially by the high Middle Ages and late Middle Ages, were no longer necessarily living an ascetic lifestyle. And you can see that in folk tales written by people like Chaucer, like Giovanni Boccaccio in his Il Decamerone. He talks about the excesses of the monastic communities, which is not to say that every single nun or monk lived a luxurious lifestyle that is completely at odds with the message that Jesus preached, but many did. And most monks and most nuns were not poor. Many of them, especially the ones who were actually part of the hierarchy of those communities, were nobility themselves. They were the second, third, fourth sons. They were daughters who didn't want to marry. By the way, most women were not forced to enter a convent. Most women wanted to in the Middle Ages because they wanted the freedom that being a nun would give them. They would actually have agency over themselves as a member of a monastic community, as a convent, rather than being, the property of their brother or husband or father. So that's another myth that women were forced to take the veil. No, it was something a lot of women wish they could do, but the reality is that most women could not take the veil unless they had a dowry, unless they had resources to enter the convent, because just like getting married, they were basically, to a person, they were marrying Jesus, which meant they were joining this community and they had to bring some financial resources with them so that they would not be an economic burden on the community, right? So yeah, good. Sorry, bit of a tangent away from food. Okay.
Said, all of my attempts to grow lovage have been eaten by birds.
Yeah, lovage. There's another good one. Lovage. Brilliant. Yeah. So all of these herbs.
So I tagged lovage seeds in the store.
If you'd like to buy some more lovage seeds, we've tagged them. Okay. Okay. So ginger. So ginger, for those who haven't ever used powdered ginger, it is pungent. It is strong. So go warily. This is about a quarter teaspoon of ginger. So that's how much we're going to put into these 2 egg yolks, right? Next, and here's the other reason why I'm pretty certain that there is fresh ginger, right? Because it specifies puder ginger powder. If the only thing you have is dry ginger, which you're clearly going to grate into a powder or pound into a powder to use. If that's the only thing you have, then you can take it for granted. You don't need to specify puder ginger because there is no alternative. But here they've specified it, which to me implies there is an alternative, i.e. fresh. Yep. Anyway, moving on. Great. So we've got our powdered ginger. Mix that in. Smells so nice. Next, raisins of currants. So these are not raisins of currants. These are just raisins. I ordered some currants, as we would call them generally these days. Dried currants, they are not here yet. So I'm just going to use regular raisins. Dried, the difference between this is a Thompson raisin. Right, the difference between a Thompson raisin and a currant is a couple of things. Texture, currants are much smaller. And so they are also a little more tart than Thompson raisins are. And because they're smaller, you don't have to do anything to them. They're already kind of nicely recipe sized, shall we say. Whereas raisins like these, they're kind of big. So to make these more currant sized, I'm going to go ahead and chop them a little bit, because these are big juicy raisins and we want the really small currants for better distribution throughout our mixture. Now again, there's no quantity mentioned here, so I'm going to go with relative to what I have here. We're going to start with about a 1/4 cup of raisins that I will then chop. And then we'll add about a 1/4 cup of dates, because I'm just going to make an assumption of a 1-to-1 ratio on the dates to the raisins. And the interesting detail on the dates in this recipe is that it says minced dates. So it tells us to mince them. I'm so excited when we get any instructions, right? So we have minced dates. But not too small. So even though the currants are small, because they're small by themselves, the dates should not be minced too small, which kind of tells me that they're supposed to perform not just a sweetening function, but they should provide some texture, right? They should provide some chew for this so that it's not just a paste. Again, I'm just so giddy whenever we get any kind of details in these recipes. Minced dates, but not too small. I mean, granted, what is small? It's all relative. But I'm ecstatic that the author of this recipe saw fit to give us anything more than just a series of words. Okay, here are our currants, and this is actually an olive wood cutting board. It's literally a slice from an olive tree. I purchased this in Florence back in 2021, back when the world was still sort of in COVID and travel was just slowly starting to pick up, and there was almost no one in Florence. It was so wonderful. My favorite time in Florence ever was during COVID. Because there were so few people there. It was wonderful. Now tourism is back up to full speed and there's just humans galore. Right, okay, so dates. These are dates. Dates come from a palm tree, a specific kind of palm tree called a date palm. They They were and are very sweet. Literally, you can date sugar is a thing, date syrup is a thing. Just you don't have to do almost anything to them. They are just naturally sweet. So I'm going to use about 3 dates because that's about roughly will be roughly about a quarter cup. And it says to mince them, but not too small. Now, if you buy dates in some places, especially if they're still on the branch, which you can buy dates on the branch still, they will have pits in them. So you will need to pit them. Thankfully, dates are it's probably the easiest fruit in the world to get the pit out of. Just be aware. Don't just bite into it and lose a tooth.
Yeah, that would suck.
Yeah. Okay. Questions, handsome?
Somebody asked where you're from, but I kind of answered that. Everyone loves the channel because you're a great teacher.
Thank you, everyone, for those compliments. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And I'd like to thank all of my channel members and my patrons and my Facebook subscribers who are out there watching. I really appreciate your support. And I appreciate all of you who've left me all the little gifts, the gems and whatnot, and the super chats. I'm very honored that you've decided to give me money to do this. Oh, goodness. Okay. So here we have what it looks like so far. Okay, this is it so far. So now I have, now that I've seen what that much raisin, that quantity of raisins and dates accomplishes, I can decide if I want to add more. And thinking about my quantity of paste, which is over here, here's my paste. Thinking about how much room this will not take up and how much yolk there sort of still is floating around there, I'm going to go ahead and add more dates and raisins. And I think I'm going to do about the exact same amount. So ultimately, this is looks like it's going to be about half a cup of raisins and half a cup of dates. Minced, but not too small. And the not too small part is no doubt because dates turn into a paste really quickly. They do not need much coaxing to assume a paste-like state. Okay. And some more raisins of Corinth. Corinth is one of the multiple ways that Corinth was spelt in the 14th and 15th centuries. I seem to be way behind on the chat. The last comment I have in the chat is about Tyrian Palace or Tyron Palace. Tryon Palace.
Which is funny because the latest one is another comment about Tryon Palace, saying what it was from Autumn. Say hello to Autumn.
Autumn is back?
Yeah. Or still here.
Oh, okay.
My dog's homework. Smart lady. Yep.
Okay, let's go ahead and add this into our bowl.
Which book are you?
This one is actually, this recipe appears in the Petit Pernod. This recipe actually appears in about 8 different English cookbooks, and I think one of them is actually in a form of curry. And we'll get to that in a moment, why that's really relevant.
Which book are you? Because I was going to tag.
You can't tag this one. This one is not a book. Oh, actually, well, you might be able to look up 2 15th century cookery books. It is published in that particular tome. Okay, so as you see, that actually seems to have picked up that egg yolk pretty nicely. And so now we have something that is not overly liquidy, which we definitely don't want. We don't want a liquidy filling. Even though it doesn't say that here, the fact that we're going to be either frying this in oil, so kind of like deep frying-ish, or baking it. Either way, you don't want a very liquid filling in basically a hand pie because there's no dish technically to catch anything that leaks out. So we don't want a lot of free-flowing liquid in this particular dish. Yeah, okay, I'm gonna take a taste and see if I want to add a little more. I think we need some more ginger in that. I will openly and freely confess that my ginger is very old, and it was pre-powdered, which means that it's not the most gingery ginger in the world, shall we say. Okay, so there is our filling. Lovely. And you'll notice there's actually no salt in here, and that's why I think the sugar that we added was not meant to sweeten it so much as to make the flavors pop, because the currants and the raisins, they're sugar bombs, basically. They're Mother Nature's sugar bombs. Okay, so let's get to this part. The final instruction says mela all togetheris, which means to mix it all together, and put it in a thin coffin. Let bake, or fry in fresh grease. Okay, now there's one version of this recipe that does something that we're going to do today. Actually, there's two versions of this recipe in other sources that say to bake first and then to fry it. And I think that's brilliant because baking will firm everything up. And then when you put it in the grease to fry, the grease is going to infuse the crust and it's going to get all yummy and crispy and flaky, and it'll be enriched by the oil from frying. So that's what we're going to do here today, especially because I'm working with cassava flour instead of wheat flour. Wheat flour has gluten, which would give it structure. The cassava flour doesn't have very much to give it structure. So that is why we are going to actually be baking it first and then frying it, which, as I said, is also in and of itself a valid medieval technique. It's just not necessarily specifically in this version of the recipe, but the petite pernante, that I've seen at least 8 different recipes for them. So this was apparently a very popular dish. And I've even seen it in a chronicle that documented a feast menu, an entire feast menu for a great feast, I think hosted by John Duke of Bedford. And petite pernante was one of the dishes served in the feast. So not only do we have the recipe, but we actually have a menu from a feast in the 1410s that was actually properly prepared, was made, really made, and this dish appeared in it. So it's not just a random recipe. We actually have context for this recipe, which I find very exciting. Okay, so going to go ahead. Now so I rolled out this dough, and I don't plan on actually making just one. I plan on actually making 2 of these little babies. So now I have to decide. I probably should have. I got talking and I wasn't thinking, and I just rolled out the dough like I was rolling out any kind of coffin that's going in a pie plate. But I should have thought about it, and I should have broken it into 2 little bundles and then made 2 separate little guys. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to re-roll it. Really easy. The good thing about working with cassava flour, which again is not medieval at all. You should be working with wheat flour for these pie crusts, these pastes as they were called. But I avoid wheat and gluten, so I've used cassava flour instead, which means this experiment could go terribly awry depending on how the cassava flour actually ends up working. And for that, I should get some flour out so that I can dust my hands a little bit. If you are working with any kind of dough paste, it is very helpful to flour your hands because that will prevent it from sticking to your hands. And you will occasionally have to reflour them. Okay, I'm just going to make this into a ball and then split it into 2, basically. So we will make 2 of these little guys. And this one definitely does not count as a Lenten dish. It is a vegetarian dish, but it is not Lenten because it has the egg yolks in it, right? So just keep that in mind. We are wandering a little bit outside of Lenten dishes with this first one, but it's still vegetarian. So for those of you who wish to pursue a vegetarian diet and would like to experiment with vegetarian dishes from the Middle Ages, this is indeed one of them. Not vegan though, again, because of the eggs. Right. Okay, so let's go ahead and roll out coffin number 1 again. And this dough has saffron in it, which is why it's lightly yellow, because cassava flour is white, and I mean white, but you'll notice that actually has a nice yellow tone to it. And again, the recipe for the coffin just says take fair flour, sugar, saffron, and salt, and make a fair paste. It doesn't even say to add water, which you kind of have to assume if you're going to make a paste. So we don't know how much saffron should go in it. We don't know if it should be enough saffron that it actually tastes like saffron or if it's just enough saffron to make it a pleasant yellow color. Saffron is very often used in these recipes specifically to make things a beautiful yellow. Saffron was also, just like today, saffron was in the Middle Ages a very expensive spice, sometimes worth its weight in gold. So you really do have to take that into consideration when you are interpreting these recipes, that if you use a lot of saffron, that makes it, again, seriously conspicuous consumption. I probably should have floured this cloth before I put this on. I may regret my life choices. I'm going to re-roll it. I'm going to put flour on and re-roll it. Yeah. Because the thinner it gets, the harder it is to get it off of the cloth, especially because this is not wheat flour. Again, wheat flour, one of the benefits of wheat flour, and one of the reasons I avoid it in terms of baking structure, is that it contains gluten. Gluten is a kind of protein to which our bodies actually generally don't react well, no matter what anyone may say. It's a fact. Gluten causes all kinds of problems that most people don't realize they're causing. But the good part about gluten for baking is that it provides structure. It literally creates this protein lattice that actually gives the dish shape and strength and structural integrity. Okay, so this time I am going to dust the cloth with flour.
Mason said, I'm hoping to make marchpane soon. Marchpane?
Yeah, marchpane, yeah.
I made lemon pasta a while ago. I might make it again soon, however, certainly less of it than last time.
Yeah, for those who wonder what marchpane is, it's marzipan. And medieval marzipan is actually not much different from modern marzipan, shockingly. Medieval marzipan was flavored heavily with rosewater for the most part. Rosewater was the flavor giver par excellence in the medieval kitchen. Before there was vanilla in Europe, there was rosewater. And I know some of you don't like rosewater. You don't like the perfumey quality of it. I get that. And you don't have to use rosewater in a dish if it calls for rosewater. But if you want a medieval dish, you cannot use vanilla. Vanilla does not make its way up until Europe until, I think, the 17th century. It originally, for those who don't know, vanilla originally comes from Madagascar, and it's a specific kind of orchid. And the problem with this specific kind of orchid is that until this clever gentleman in Mexico figured out how to pollinate the orchids manually, you have to have reverse that. Vanilla, I think it's from Mexico, actually. Anyway, this comes from a special orchid, and there's exactly one kind of bee in the world that can pollinate it. But there was a gentleman who eventually figured out, I think in the early 20th century, how to manually pollinate the vanilla orchid. So, but vanilla doesn't make its way into Europe until European cuisine until the 17th century, and it takes a long time to actually proliferate through European cuisine. Okay, so we have our first little guy right there. And now I'm going to go ahead and take some of our filling, about half of it, in fact. I'm going to go ahead and put this here in this sort of off to the side. I'm going to go for a kind of half moon situation here, more or less.
Christina Gordon says you can make a saffron extract. It may help. I'm not sure what that's in regards to. I may have missed part of the conversation. And then, can you point to what the dead cat is? Oh no, your fingers are.
Dead cat? I have a dead cat?
The microphone.
Oh.
This is
the microphone. This is what allows you to hear me no matter where I am.
But the fuzzy part is the dead cat.
Oh, this is the dead cat. Yeah. Why are people asking about the dead cat?
Because I mentioned it, because we're talking about trying to hide that so it doesn't detract from the modern.
Yeah, unfortunately, if we hide it, then you can't hear me.
That's what I was talking about. We get a lavalier that I can hide, but then it still needs a dead cat, which makes it obvious.
Yeah, unfortunately, a dead cat will always make it obvious. The sound quality goes down drastically without the microphone, unfortunately. And I've tried different things like, well, here, I can do that. It makes it less obvious anyway. Slightly smaller. Yeah, that I can do. Yeah, no. Okay, so as anticipated, the cassava flour is annoying. The cassava flour paste is definitely annoying, which definitely makes me want to bake this even more, want to bake it first before dropping it in a pot of hot grease. Yep, we're certain. I'm going to have to do some manual reconstruction here. Okay, comments or questions?
Madagascar is the largest exporter of vanilla in the world.
It is, currently. But I think it comes from Mexico, actually, originally.
And Alicia asks, will the cassava flour hold up the pastry? Evidently not.
Well, no, it will. I mean, look, so it is standing on its own. So it has enough structure to stand on its own. It's just very fussy. It is just very fussy. But baking it will basically, we're going to bake it enough to sort of make it blind bake, and then we'll drop it in oil and it will be fine. That's the theory anyway. Let's see what happens. One of the things about these cooking shows that some of you who've never seen it before maybe don't know is that I try to keep it as authentic an experience as possible, by which I mean we're exploring together. Like, I haven't pre-tested this. We're testing this in real time. You are watching the trial and error process in action, figuring things out as we go. Yeah, we'll see. It might also explode when I drop it in grease, in my clay pot of lamb tallow or beef tallow, one or the other. Yeah. Handsome, could you check that for me? I think the vanilla orchid came from Mexico first, then got exported to Madagascar because they do well in Madagascar.
I think you're right.
Yeah, I think they're from Mexico originally, which is part of the Columbian exchange, right?
Mesoamerica, including parts of
Yeah.
Mexico.
Yeah. So there's this bee, this one single bee in Mesoamerica, Central America, basically, that pollinates the vanilla orchid. But I forget his name.
Charles Francois Antoine Morin.
Yeah. This basically this Frenchman figured out how to manually pollinate the vanilla orchid and transplanted them to Madagascar, where they grow very well.
Oh, interesting.
Hmm.
But he just discovered that the pollination, it was an Edmund Albius, a 12-year-old enslaved child who lived on the French island of Reunion, who discovered that the plant could be hand pollinated.
Yep.
French botanist and plant collector Jean-Michel Claude Ricard falsely claimed to have discovered the technique.
Nice. Okay, so.
Interesting.
Okay, here we go. It is not pretty, but that's okay. I'll futz around with it some more and see if I can figure out a way to make it pretty with the cassava flour. There are other an alternative medieval flour that I could have used. I actually have some now. I forgot that I got rice flour. Rice flour. A lot of people think rice is not a medieval European thing, but it absolutely is. They grew rice in Italy. And rice flour is a thickener that is used in many medieval sauces and stews. Bread is common, but rice flour also is very common. So if you are looking for a gluten-free way, but an authentic way to be gluten-free in your medieval cuisine, you can use rice flour for things. And I forgot that I have some rice flour. I'll try rice flour next time and we'll see what happens. Probably just as frustrating. Oh, the experimentation. Medieval cultivars of wheat would have probably been less inflammatory and caused fewer issues because they wouldn't have bred the way modern wheat has been bred to have super gluten, basically, as part of the growth and defense process. But okay, let's see. Okay, there is our second roll. They did not have rubber scrapers in the Middle Ages. Someone commented recently on one of the cooking shows that your finger is the rubber scraper. However, I've got some sensory issues with that. I do not want to stick my finger inside of this bowl and scrape out all of this yolk. So I am going to use a rubber scraper to do so, because I also can't stand waste, but I also don't want to use my finger to get all the rest of the yolk out here. So it is a necessary evil for me. However, I would pay someone to keep their hands nice and clean, I guess, and be my authentic bowl scraper. Okay. Smooth that out. Let's see what we've got here. Just needs a lot of manipulation, that's all. Okay, handsome questions, comments?
Nope, nothing new.
Okay. So after we put this in these in the oven and let them bake, I'll show you the clay pot we'll be using in which to fry them. Medieval kitchens had a couple of different kinds of, or a couple of options for cooking implements. They're clay pots, ceramic pots, very, very common, very, very common. And they came in a wide array of shapes. They came flat bottom. They came with tripod legs already integrated into them. They had ceramic frying pans. They had ceramic pie plates, in fact. You could get cast iron pots. You could also get copper pots and pans. So there was an array of options. The metal pans would have been for a very well-heeled kitchen. The ceramics would have been what everyone could basically afford. And ceramics really do seem to have been viewed as the consumable of the Middle Ages. We have so many potsherds that have survived in the middens, the trash piles, basically, from medieval towns and villages, because it was acknowledged, it was just a fact that they would eventually break. That repeat exposure to heating and cooling would eventually make them relatively fragile, and they would just, at some point, give up the ghost. And it seems that they were not expensive enough to be worth trying to repair. But in fact, if you're using it to cook, you probably couldn't repair ceramics anyway in a way that they could still be utilized for cooking. So yeah, ceramics definitely viewed as, a sort of consumable product. Whereas a tinker is the person who actually goes and fixes metal pots and pans. That's what a tinker is, a profession. It is a profession. And a tinker is someone who would go around and fix pots and pans and re-tin your copper pans, because it was acknowledged that you did not want to cook in a copper pan that didn't have a layer of tin. Copper is toxic if you cook in just copper. So you need to make sure that your copper pans and pots are tinned, are lined in tin. That's what a tinker does. Now, if you have once or twice cooked something in an untinned copper pan or pot, you're probably going to be okay, but you shouldn't do it more than that. Okay, it's not looking bad. Look, this side looks perfect.
Okay,
this is the beautiful side. This is the abstract side.
Very medieval thing to do to have a personal scraper from Alicia.
I agree, Alicia. Personal scraper for the win.
Christina says, are you scoring them to prevent rupturing in the oil?
So I don't think I need, so I've thought about, that's a good question. Am I scoring them to prevent a rupture in either the oven or the oil? So I don't know if I'm going to have to, because there's enough fault lines built into it. Actually, you know what we might do? It's an experiment, right? It's an experiment. If it breaks apart in the oil, then we'll just have slightly oily parts. But I think what we'll do is we'll score one of them, and we won't score the other, and we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. It's pure science here. Pure empirical method. Okay.
Makes me think of Pot Island in Rome. Oh. Autumn gave you a super chat.
Oh, thank you, Autumn. Really appreciate that. That's super kind of you.
I love this so much, and can I get a hug?
Does she mean a real hug?
I don't know.
I'm sorry if I don't know what a hug is. Is a hug something I can do digitally, or do you mean like this? I'm hugging you. God, I feel I'm so medieval. I don't know what that is. Thank you, Autumn. I really appreciate it. Here, let me. Shimmy. Damn it. Where's the cat? Bring me a cat so I can hug the cat for them. I will hug. Do you like cats? I can hug a kitty for you in your place. Shimi ran away. Okay, so I have scored one of them and not the other. Okay, so I've got the oven at 180 degrees centigrade, about 350 Fahrenheit. Oh, here we go. Here, little grunter. Okay.
And your mic's about to fall off.
Yeah, fix the mic. Okay. Okay, Autumn, this is your stand-in. This is my Navi. She's one of our rescue babies. When we found her, she was about 5 weeks old, and her mother. So we rescued her. So she's now one of our.
And Alex says, "Girl, I love your outfit."
Thank you, Alex. Appreciate that. I'm just going to defer over here, everyone. I can still talk to you, though. I'm still here. Okay. Okay, so we've placed the petit penant in the oven. Yes.
I tagged the Lavalier.
Oh, did you?
So I can buy it from us on the
Oh my God.
to get 10% off right now.
Okay. Okay, so my outfit. So for those who don't know, this is a 1470s to 1490s Florentine outfit. This is called a cotta, C-O-T-T-A, in the language of Florence. And that's because it's not a gamora, for those who know what a gamora is, because a gamora is a simple garment. It's this shape, but it's made of something like wool or maybe linen or fustian. Whereas this is made of a fancy brocade, so it's called a cotta. Yeah, but I'm dressed for the way a great lady of the house would be if she were going to go oversee the process in the kitchen. And we do know for a fact that in 14th and 15th century Florence, wealthy ladies who ran great households in Florence did in fact do some of the cooking themselves and would often go to the kitchens and oversee the process. We actually have letters from Margherita Dattini to her husband, who's out in their country estate in Fiesole. And she actually sends him, this is a letter that she sent to him with food she had prepared. She says, "I have made you this bread and this stew in the way that you like," or this roast in the way that you like. "I've made it myself here. I hope that it nourishes you and keeps you from missing me too much while you're out there in the country handling business." Yeah. Okay, so our petit penant are in the oven. They're baking, and I'll let them bake for about 15 minutes. They don't necessarily have to be done because we're then going to be cooking them. We're going to be frying them. Step 2, we're going to fry them in our fresh grease. So grease in this case is probably tallow or lard. In this case, I've got tallow, and this is a clay pot. It's a modern Korean clay pot, but it is a clay pot. So I do have 2 clay pots that I actually do cook with on a daily basis. And even though they're not medieval in terms of their decorative aspect, they do still function very much like a medieval clay pot would have. So we will be cooking these babies in an actual clay pot in tallow. Beef tallow specifically. I actually have some lamb's tallow that I just rendered too recently. Right. Okay, so while that is prepared, let's move on to our next recipe. So we're now going to be moving on, and this is a book. Were we able to tag Registrum Coquine in our products? No. Okay, so this is a book that is called Registrum Coquine, and it is actually from early 15th century Rome. So this is Roman cuisine, Italian cuisine. But the recipes are identified as being recipes that represent a very international cast of characters. The cook who composed this is not anonymous. He's not the anonymous type. His name was Johannes Bockenheim. So he's actually a German living and working in the court of Pope Martin V in like the 14 teens through 1420s. And he compiles this cookbook that he calls Registrum Coquine, literally means cooking book, record of cooking. And he has all sorts of recipes, and not just recipes for the wealthy. Several of these recipes are specified as being for peasants, for people who live in the countryside, for rustics. So this actually gives us a better idea about cuisine across the greater spectrum. For instance, here we have an apple torta, an apple pie for peasants. The recipe reads, he's writing in a terrible Latin. His Latin is so bad that Cicero would be rolling over in his grave. But here's the translation of his really bad Latin. To make an apple pie for peasants, peel the apples, choosing apples of different flavors. Cut them in the middle as if you were separating a host. A host is the wafer of communion, which is usually split in half. Arrange them in a thin sheet of pasta and mix with saffron and other sweet spices. Then roast them in olive oil, adding honey on top. It is good for peasants, right? Doesn't that sound delicious? But doesn't that also sound very familiar, right? He actually specifies to take a variety of apples so that you're not just getting one flavor of apple, but a multiple flavor profile, right? And, specifies to peel them. You can't take that for granted. And then it's flavored with saffron, which of course modern apple pies are not flavored with saffron. And, he talks sweet spices could be cloves or ginger or cinnamon or galangal or grains of paradise or cinnamon blossoms. There's all kinds of things that sweet spices could be. And then he actually says to add olive oil into it, right? But it's really interesting. Yeah, arrange them in a thin sheet of pastry dough, basically. So, it's so much like a modern apple pie, and yet not, because it's roasted in olive oil and sweetened with honey. But it's delicious. I've had this. It's absolutely, absolutely wonderful. Super yummy. And yet he says that this is the way the peasants eat. So that's interesting because of the addition of saffron, which, as I mentioned, is sometimes worth its weight in gold. So we aren't necessarily certain how correct he is or how truthful he's being when he suggests that some of these dishes are for peasants, or maybe his idea of peasant, Villanis, just means someone who lives out in the country. It doesn't say anything necessarily about their socioeconomic status. Right. Anyway, there's a lot of really fascinating recipes in here, and there's a whole section of dishes that are specifically meant for Lent, and it starts here. It's actually there's some fish recipes. There's a bunch of vegetable recipes. So here begins the cookbook for Lent, right? And the first recipe he includes there is actually called a leek stew for rustics and peasants, whatever the distinction there might be. To make leek soup for rustics and peasants, take the white part of the leek and wash it well, boiling it for a short time. Mince it with a knife and mix with almond milk and a bit of olive oil, adding sugar and salt, then sprinkle with cinnamon. And if it is not Lent, you can prepare it with a good fat broth made from different meats. This is very good for rustics. Rustics, it feels so judgmental, but there it is. But honestly, with the exception of cinnamon, which would have been expensive, and almond milk would have also been expensive. Everything else definitely seems like something the bottom 80% could have afforded. Again, the cinnamon and the sugar and the almond milk are make me a bit skeptical about it actually being for rustics. Or it could be a sign that that people in the bottom 80% actually had more freely accessible assets and had more spending money than we assume they do, right? It could go either way here. There's a lot of interesting ways to read these recipes. Okay, questions, Handsome? Handsome?
See here, we talked about tallow being what candles are made out of. Of course, said that he has the Registrum Coquine now.
Oh, nice.
And Christina mentions modern apple trees are grafted to have multiple types of apples in one tree.
That is true.
Yeah.
Okay, so in our Lenten recipes, there are some very interesting ones. One of them is a hemp seed soup. I don't have any hemp seeds on hand, but there is also a nigella soup that is good for Bohemians and Swabians, which some of these words are really old words for tribes of Germanic tribes from the ancient Roman Empire. So his choice of language is quaint, linguistically speaking. So I do have nigella seed right here. It's also known as black cumin. It does not taste anything like not black cumin. It has a really rich flavor. It's very tasty. And here we have a soup that is nigella soup. So here's the recipe. So we're definitely going to try this. I definitely wanted to try this. To prepare nigella for the Bohemians and the Swabians, boil the nigella until it becomes soft. Then discard the water and mix it with almond milk and a bit of saffron. And it will be good for Bohemians and the Swabians. Okay, seems really simple. We boil the nigella until it becomes soft, strain the water out, then we mix it with almond milk and a little bit of saffron. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. So I have here this was half a cup of nigella. This is half a cup of nigella seed. And I've got a pot. Unfortunately, I'm out of clay pots. All of my clay pots are currently occupied. Otherwise, I would do this in a clay pot. Just going to put that in there like so. I'm going to add some water. Enough water to cover. It just needs to be enough to cover it, to soften it, basically. This is, again, I have never made this before in my life. I have never done this recipe. I've never used nigella seeds in this way. Never. Nigella is actually Nigella sativa. So it's actually, it's called also black cumin and sometimes black sesame and some other things. None of those things which it actually is. Interestingly, the seeds are all clinging to the side, which is annoying.
I did the same thing in the bottle when I tried to pour them out.
Oh, yeah.
It's very annoying.
These are very annoying. I don't like this. Okay, and we're going to just put it on the stove and we're going to cook it until it is soft. Now let's get to the other component of this recipe, the almond milk. And let's talk about almond milk. Because we're supposed to boil the nigella until it becomes soft, discard the water, mix it with almond milk and a bit of saffron. We'll talk about the saffron in more detail when we get to that. First, we have to make our almond milk. Okay, so those of you who have purchased commercial almond milk, most commercial almond milks, all the commercial almond milks that I've seen, all of them are garbage. They are maybe 5% almonds. They're filled with all sorts of thickeners and flavor enhancers and stabilizers and preservatives, and they are not real almond milk. Real almond milk, medieval almond milk, should probably be like 2-to-1 water to almond. So 1 part almond, 2 parts water. So 50% or 30% almonds, not 5% almonds. So if you want to actually do a medieval dish with almond milk, I really recommend making your own. Now, that doesn't mean you have to do what I'm about to do. I'm about to demonstrate for you making almond milk the medieval way. So to make almond milk the medieval way, there are actually a bunch of recipes that call for almond milk that then also specify how to make the almond milk, which is nice. Generally, the process seems to be to soak your almonds at least overnight, and some of them actually say to soak the almonds for multiple days, changing the water every day. And the reason they would do that is actually a nutritional one. By sprouting your almonds, you're actually reducing the phytic acid, the anti-nutrients that would cause the almonds to actually remove nutrients from your body during the digestive process. But by sprouting them, you actually make them more nutritious and more digestible. So they might not have understood that per se, but it is a thing, it is a side benefit of soaking your almonds multiple days, as it makes them much more digestible. Yeah. Yeah, this is yeah, everyone, this is not a, I mean, I don't really care if people are enjoying a biblical discussion, but this is definitely not the forum for religious debate. Yeah.
I have low tolerance for it.
Yeah.
know.
Well, I don't, you don't have to delete people's comments just because they're discussing the Bible. It's if they start Bible thumping that I don't want anyone to be made to feel uncomfortable. Right. So the one of the things that all of the recipes say is to remove the skins of your almonds. And this is actually really easy to do. Once you soak them, and these have only actually been soaking since this morning, since I forgot to soak them last night, the skins come off real easy. You just squeeze it out. Bloop, just like that. And I actually have found uses for the almond skins, medieval uses. So one of the uses for almond skins in the medieval kitchen, no less, is to scorch the skins until they blacken and then grind them up into a powder. And then you can use the blackened almond skin powder to dye food black. Because medieval cooks were very fond of making very elaborate and very beautiful dishes, especially dishes called a subtlety, where one kind of food or dish is made to look like something it isn't at all. For instance, a swan made out of gingerbread, real medieval gingerbread, not the fluffy thing that people eat these days. Right. So the scorched almond skins would then be ground up, and then you have a natural black food dye, basically. Now, and it would be true black, right? Now, I haven't tried this, and I'm not certain what it would do for the flavor of the food, but it was interesting for me to find an actual use for the almond skins, the almond peels, basically, because the medieval world was very much a circular economy, meaning that everything was used and reused until it could be used no more. So there is always a use for a waste product in them. It's very rare that there isn't, which is why it's curious to me that the molasses, the bitter juice that is strained off of the sugar in the sugar refining process, that I haven't been able to find a medieval use for it, because that just doesn't track with the medieval ethos, basically. So to make almond milk the medieval way, modernly, I have a video on this on the channel, by the way. If you want to see how to make almond milk modernly, I've got a step-by-step tutorial on how to make your own almond milk using a food processor or a blender. The medieval food processor, though. Okay. Am I moving again, everyone? Is it still frozen? You give it a moment to refresh.
Checking.
Come back. Okay. Let me know if I'm moving again, everyone. How annoying. I wondered why the numbers started dropping so drastically. Like, what did I say that offended everyone? No, it's just that I stopped moving. I'm moving again. Yay. Victory. Thank you for those of you who were so devoted. Yeah, I appreciate Aaron. I appreciate you all just sticking around, waiting for me to start moving again. I watched the numbers dropping and I couldn't figure out what I was doing wrong. Well, apparently I wasn't doing anything as far as anyone could tell. Oh goodness, now people are going to think I'm some kind of AI witch. Oh goodness. Well, if you're enjoying this live stream medieval cooking party, please double tap your screen and consider subscribing. Welcome back, everyone. I'm a real person. I'm a real person. I'm not AI. I hate generative AI with a passion. I wish generative AI would go to hell. It should be banned, made illegal, done away with forever, and I will not bend on that in the least, considering that my hard work and research and creation has been pilfered by AI companies to create their bloody engines that are trying to put me out of business. So yeah. Okay, welcome back, everyone. Still peeling almonds, I'm just going to check over here on the Nigella and see, oh, it's definitely nowhere near soft enough. So even though I'm thinking about this now, intellectualizing the process a little bit for this Nigella soup, I am suspecting that I probably should have maybe soaked them overnight to soften them, even though the recipe does not make any such indication at all. It does not indicate in any way that these seeds should first be soaked. And clearly, there are many recipes that have no problem suggesting that things should be soaked in advance. For instance, the fava beans from the 2 bean dishes we're also going to be exploring here today. So even though we're following the recipe as close to the recipe as it makes sense to, we'll see what happens. If I were to do this again, I would probably soak the Nigella seeds overnight in advance. Yeah. Okay, just one more bit of water. Yeah, okay, and let's check our petit pernontes. Okay, so here they are thus far. This one is still a little soft on top, so I'm going to put them in for a little bit longer. Yep. Okay, great. Okay. Okay, questions or comments, Handsome?
Everyone's just happy you're back.
Yeah, I'm happy I'm back too, everyone. I didn't even know I was being missed because I was still moving on the screen that I could see. How annoying is that? Okay, brief pause to drink some liquid. And many of you have asked me this in the past, and some of you may be wondering, I am drinking jasmine tea. No, that is not an authentic choice for a 15th century Florentine woman. It's not an authentic choice for any European before the 17th century. And for green tea, probably not any European before the, God, I don't know, 20th century. So yeah, they did have infused beverages in the Middle Ages. They had infused beverages that were meant for medicinal purposes, but they did also have infused water just for pleasure. In the Goodman of Paris, Le Ménagier du Paris from the roughly 1391, this fantastic medieval home companion, this guide on how to be the perfect upper middle class housewife in the late 14th century, describes several different recipes for infused water flavored with herbs and blossoms that you should keep on hand so that if you have guests, you can offer them this water. So no, it is a myth that people only drank beer and wine and ale and cider in the Middle Ages. We have evidence that it was expected that you should be able to offer your guests more than just those fermented beverages. Handsome?
Christina says, it sounds like you call him handsome.
I do call him handsome. That's my term of affection for him.
Burdock tea or dandelion coffee?
Interesting.
And Erin says, I acquired a new teapot. I love the whole experience of using it.
Yeah, I have several different kinds of tea sets, and I actually take part once a month in a traditional Korean tea ceremony class. I have my next class tomorrow morning. So I actually know how to do the proper traditional Joseon style tea service. It's a very relaxing experience. It's very peaceful. It's very beautiful. It's purposefully slow and elegant, and it forces both the person providing the service and the guests to really slow down and just enjoy the moment. So there is something absolutely beautiful about a proper slow tea ceremony. Okay, so we have some almonds, not all of them, but that's okay. It's enough for now. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to put some almonds into the mortar.
Bill Hall says he's become quite fond of stinging nettle tea.
Oh, stinging nettle tea. I will admit I have never tried stinging nettle tea, even though I lived in Germany for 12 years where they definitely drink it. What does it taste like? Stinging nettles and I have a complex relationship. Anyway, so the medieval mortar and pestle would have been huge. Some of you have heard this before, I'll say it again. A medieval mortar, the bowl part, the vessel basically, would have been almost 2 feet tall, and it would have been very wide. And the pestle would have been the size of an oar, a rowboat oar, and would have basically allowed the person, the mortar would have gone on the ground, and the person would actually stand to grind things, which means you can put the whole force of your body into the act of grinding, which makes a mortar and pestle a very efficient food processing tool. And it's going to give you different results than if you just use, I forgot to get a fresh thing of rose water. There's little bottles of rose water in the top shelf there. You're going to get a much different effect using a mortar and pestle to grind anything than if you use an electric, anything with metal blades, and especially something whose metal blades are motor driven, because at the speed at which a motor can drive metal blades, say in a spice grinder, those blades can get very, very hot, and that's going to impact the flavor profile of your spices to the point where it might actually cause them to go to spoil. The oils in your spices to actually get so hot that they go rancid. So you will get a different effect. Using a modern food processor is not going to give you quite the same effect that using unmechanized hand implements is going to do. So if you care about the more authentic experience, then slow down a bit. Get your kitchen workout in, right? Handsome, could you get me a little thing of rose water, top right?
Bill Hall says it tastes like green tea.
Oh, interesting. Stinging nettle tea tastes like green tea. I love green tea. It's my favorite tea. Rose water is a hydrosol, part of the distillation process of distilling rose petals. And it's very expensive. True rose water is very expensive. I recently learned that you cannot just substitute rose essential oil, a little bit of rose essential oil and water for rose water, mostly because a lot of rose essential oil is actually not food grade. And if you use it incorrectly, you could actually possibly suffer from toxicity. So just keep that in mind. So as part of the almond milk making process, you add a little bit of water and a little bit of rose water into the mortar, and you grind your almonds into the water. And basically this takes out the fat from the almonds and infuses it into the water, and that is your almond milk. We were hoping to maybe go on a journey of a shopping trip today to the traditional markets and see if we could actually find maybe an antique mortar and pestle of the appropriate size, but that didn't end up happening for reasons. I will tell you that if you actually start doing all of these things by hand in the kitchen, you're going to develop amazing musculature in your arms. Questions or comments, Handsome?
Christina says you should check out a molcajete for Mexico.
Oh, yeah. A molcajete. Yes, they are excellent also. Yep. I can't get those here in Korea. Yep, I have used a molcajete. They are quite excellent. Okay, so let me show you where we're at this far. And this is the way I have taught myself basically to make almond milk in a mortar and pestle. You don't just dump a whole bunch of water and some almonds in. You mash up the almonds, add a little bit of water, mash some more, add a little bit more water, right? Because if you just add a whole bunch of water and some almonds, you're going to end up with a mess. So I start by mashing the almonds, add a little water, mash the almonds some more, add a little more water, etc. Bit by bit. Now, almond flavor, what everyone associates as almond flavor is actually bitter almond. Bitter almonds are toxic. However, I'm pretty certain that they would actually possibly add in one bitter almond for a whole, one bitter almond to all of these almonds. And that's the toxicity levels of one bitter almond to all of those almonds should not actually be any kind of damaging. But that's why almond extract smells like almonds. It's not extracted from edible sweet almonds. It's extracted from bitter almonds. That's where your really strong almond flavor comes from. So almond milk doesn't really have a strong flavor. Right? And it's not supposed to. It's supposed to be, in the medieval mindset, this is supposed to be a dairy substitute for ember days, which are regular days of fasting throughout the week, Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday. during any time of year, and then for specific fasting times of year like Advent and Lent. Right, so almond milk was a substitute for dairy milk and dairy milk products. And there are even recipes that actually create almond milk cream cheese, basically. Very interesting that, medieval people were already basically experimenting with vegan cheeses. Not for health reasons, mind you, just as a way to still enjoy food when they were supposed to be fasting, right? I definitely don't think that eating almond milk products sticks to the spirit of the idea of fasting when almonds are a luxury good. That's not living an ascetic lifestyle. In my opinion, almond milk actually is more delicious than meat broth in many applications. So I really feel like they were, letter of the law, not spirit of the law. But that's humans. Humans will human, right? Humans will human. It's one of the things that binds us across cultures. We will always perform the mental gymnastics we need to work around the rules that we don't like and still make ourselves feel like we're still complying.
Cool Cat says hello to our beautiful historian. I finally caught a live. Yay.
Oh, Cool Cat, nice to see you. Finally, welcome to my medieval cooking party, possibly at a new time slot or one of the time slots. With all the time differences of everyone all over the world, it's really tricky to find a time slot that works for everyone, including me, because to do these live streams, I need to have certain energy levels. So, doing it at a time when everyone else in the world might be awake might not be a time when I'm very wakeful.
Bill Hall says, in the midst of your cooking and teaching, I just want to personally thank you for all you share with us. It is truly a delight.
Oh, thank you, Bill Hall. Really appreciate that compliment.
Of course, says, love the Ember Days. They're quarterly in the liturgical calendar.
Yep.
It's still annotated in the Farmer's Almanac.
Yeah, I didn't realize they were still annotated in the Farmer's Almanac. That is really fun. That is really fun.
Cool Cat reminded everybody to give the live a thumbs up.
Thank you, Cool Cat. Yeah, so Ember Days in the Middle Ages were not necessarily only observed quarterly. And the observation of Ember Days, sort of the frequency with which they're observed, kind of changes throughout the Middle Ages. It's one of those inconsistent things. Just the same way that so many different, that they started changing what counted as fasting food. Beaver suddenly counts as a fish because it lives in the water, right? Porpoise counts as a fish because it lives in the water. So do geese and swans and ducks because they live in the water. Right. So again, that falls in with the same idea that you can't just in many cases, it's impossible to make a broad sweeping statement about the Middle Ages because it changes. I mean, you can't even say that the church was the dominant religious authority through the whole Middle Ages because it wasn't, right? On the Iberian Peninsula from the 7th century to the 11th century, it was not the church. I mean, there were Christians, but the church wasn't the dominant religious authority there. In Scandinavia until the 11th century, there was a lot more variety in religious practices, right? So that's not even a unifying factor in the so-called Middle Ages. So when people ask me something, I generally have to ask them to specify a time and a place.
Tom, of course, said the New Orleans Diocese just approved alligator for Lent this year.
The New Orleans Diocese approved alligator for Lent this year. That's awesome. You can't make this kind of stuff up, right? This is what I mean by fact is often stranger and way more amusing than fiction is. The best authors of fiction are the ones who manage to capture the true absurdity of life. For instance, the Diocese of New Orleans sanctifying alligator as an approved Lenten food. Great. Love it. More water. Little more rose. I love rose flavored things. I love the smell of roses, the taste of rose. And of course, these days, unfortunately, your average rose bush, the rose from your average rose bush, will smell like nothing because the smell has been bred right out of them in favor of how beautiful they are, right? So that's just, to me, that's tragic. Okay, so let's check on our Nigella. See if these little babies have even thought about softening yet. No. They're softer. I wouldn't call them soft. So I think we're just going to let this cook for a while. And, again, this is one of these downsides of these medieval recipes. You'll notice there is no timing. It just says, boil the Nigella until it becomes soft. Okay. God knows how long that'll take. And here is what our almond milk is starting to look like. See how nice and milky that is? So then the next thing to do with almond milk is to strain it once it has reached the level of milkiness that we would like. And I think we may have reached all I can do with this particular batch. So, let's see. Get another bowl out to receive the strained milk. Again, I apologize for having a modern metal bowl instead of a nice medieval bowl, but that's what you get. Now, medieval strainers, there's a couple of different devices that medieval people would have had for straining. One is cloth, a nice clean cloth, linen usually. Two, they did in fact really truly have strainers, and this is not a clean cloth. This was my pie pastry. This is my paste cloth. They did absolutely have strainers in the Middle Ages, and a variety of them. Some of them have survived. They did have metal strainers, basically colanders. In fact, metal colanders, metal bowls that are perforated on the bottom with holes. We have many of those that have survived specifically from the communion service set because wine needed to be filtered for communion because medieval wine had sediment and serious sediment in it. Right. Other kinds of filters or strainers that they had. They also had colanders made of ceramic colanders, which weren't necessarily as finely perforated. So those were more used for straining things like cheese and pasta. I haven't actually seen, this is a tea strainer from Asia. This is made of bamboo. I have not seen any kind of strainer like this.
Somebody mentioned woven baskets
as
a strainer.
Right. Oh, woven baskets. Okay, yeah. So forget the bamboo part. Yeah, you could have woven basketry as a strainer. We also have horsehair strainers. So you actually have a horsehair mesh and a big wooden ring, basically, and the horsehair mesh is spanned between the ring, and they had strainers like that. And they also use them for sifting flour in different grades of screen, in essence. So yes, there were plenty of kinds of strainers in the Middle Ages, some of them very sophisticated. Someone once complained to me about using a sieve, a modern sieve, one of these wire sieves, to to actually reintegrate an egg-based sauce that had broken. And I demonstrated how to use this strainer to basically re-emulsify the egg-based custard sauce. And this gentleman very kindly, and of course you can guess oh so politely, commented for my benefit that it was completely inauthentic to use such a strainer and that all they had in the Middle Ages was cloth strainers. And that's just not true. Sorry.
Were knitting or tatting ever used for straining?
I have no evidence of knitting or tatting being used for a strainer. That's a good question.
Can't prove the negative of it.
Yeah, I can't prove a negative, but what I can say is I've seen no evidence of it. Knitting was used, whether you're talking about nail binding or double or multiple needle knitting, doesn't matter. It was used for a very limited range of items in the Middle Ages, much more limited than people might expect. So, okay, so we've put just gonna strain out the milk. Look at all that, look at that beautiful almond milk just squeezing right out of it. Yeah, nice. Okay, we'll definitely have to make some more because this isn't very much, but you can see, look how milky that looks. Time to taste it. Definitely has a nice rose flavor to it. And then here we have this mash. Now, there is actually one recipe I have that I've heard of, and I haven't found the recipe yet. I haven't gone and looked it up, that actually calls for using the almond mash to make a kind of pastry or tart, a kind of cake-like thing, but not cake like we would understand it, not a fluffy, chemically leavened cake, but a kind of sweet thing. So I need to go and find this recipe because I hate throwing things away. And you know, some people say, oh, well, you can use the almond mash to make almond cake or whatever. And I haven't had any success in making a modern dessert that tasted or felt nice with this almond mash. So if you've ever used the leftover dregs from making almond milk successfully, not something you think might work, but if you have successfully used it in a recipe, let me know. I'd be very interested to hear about your experience with that. Okay, so moving on to the next layer. Actually put this in the freezer and keep it. Last time I made almond milk, I put the mash in the fridge and forgot about it, and it looked like modern art. That's all I'm going to say. It looked like a Miro painting had become something in a bowl. Okay. Almond milk part 2. I'm going to put these almonds in here, and then I'm going to check on our petit penant in the oven. Okay. Ooh, looking good.
Erin makes a good point. I would imagine the level of work that goes into tatting would negate its use as a strainer at best.
Yeah, I suspect that's probably true, Erin. Okay, so here we go. Here are our petit penant. They are nicely solid, and as I suspected, they split themselves. They ignored the scoring. They found a natural fissure, and that's fine. That's fine. See how the nice golden on the bottom? This is typical of cassava flour. It doesn't like to get golden on the top just from hot air. It usually needs a surface. So now we can go ahead and pop these. I'm not going to put them in hot oil, but we can go ahead and fry these up in the oil and see what happens. The oil isn't hot yet though, so we're not going to do that quite yet. I can turn the oven off though. Okay, so what I'm going to do then is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to actually change these 2 pots around. I'm going to put our Nigella soup on the back burner, literally, not a metaphor. And I'm going to put our clay pot with our grease on the front burner. And I'm going to bring our grissa, as it would have been pronounced in 15th century English. Oh, really? Oh, I hate this stove sometimes.
Is it being difficult?
Yeah, I need you to get me a fire source to make it light. Yes, please.
Do we have a fire source here?
Yeah, somewhere here in this drawer, I think. There's always a way to create fire somehow. Right. Well, while we fetch the modern flint and steel to light the hearth that refuses to light through the mechanism with which it has been supposedly blessed, let's go on to the next batch of almond milk. Just once more to show you. See, isn't that nice looking almond milk? So rich, so rich. Just mash up the almonds.
Tiny lighter.
It's better than no lighter. I mean, yes, we might burn ourselves, but skin heals. Oh, by the way, there's a reason that medieval people wore wool in the kitchen. Doesn't work. Great. There's a reason that medieval people wore wool in the kitchen because, of course, in a medieval kitchen, they're working around a lot of open fire. And wool is naturally flame retardant. If you've ever tried to light wool on fire, it will put itself out basically the second the flame is no longer directly on it. Are you okay?
My fingers.
No. Do we need to go to the emergency room? We can live stream that. Okay, so I'm now heating up the tallow in the clay pot, and I'm kind of excited to see what happens when we pop one of these. We'll do one and see what happens. Because right now, this paste in which we made our petit penant, it has no fat. The flour, the recipe is very clear. It's flour, saffron, sugar, and sugar and salt, and then some water, but there's no fat in it at all. So it's pretty hard, which is why I'm hoping that frying it in the fresh grease will infuse it very nicely.
Just all the hair on the back of my finger.
Did you?
Yeah.
That's okay, it will grow back maybe. Right, so almond milk part 2. Once again, I'm mashing the almonds with our pestle in our mortar. Just getting that first mashing in to get them broken down a little bit. And then I will add just a bit of water. Oh, there's also, this might be of interest to some of you. There is also, some almond milk recipes do actually call for wine. Broth also, but wine also. So that could be an interesting upgrade to your almond milk experience. So 2 of the other recipes we're going to be playing with today are bean recipes. They're 2 different bean recipes. And one of them is medieval refried beans. It's fantastic. It is refried beans, just medieval style. And it's so fun to find these connections across continents and time. And the kind of beans that were used in medieval Europe were not the same as most of the beans that people use now. Fava beans were one of the main legumes available. Peas were also available, and I'm talking like dried peas. But fava beans were more likely, if a recipe just calls for beans, it's probably calling for fava beans. And these are fava beans.
That's an interesting point. The alcohol might lengthen its shelf life, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, certainly. An almond milk, if you have wine, it will probably, you're right, using wine to make your almond milk will probably lengthen its shelf life. Of course, I'm fairly confident that almond milk was not made in any kind of quantity with the idea of storing it. You know, a medieval kitchen, the kind of kitchen that could have afforded almond milk would have had a staff, and they probably would have had someone whose sole job was to make almond milk every day. A medieval kitchen was just such a more specialized institution than our modern home kitchens are. So, you know, it's a different experience in some ways, because you would have had someone whose sole job was probably to grind spices, whose sole job, you had a pastry chef, someone whose sole job was to make the paste, the pasta, right? You had someone whose sole job was spit boy, to turn the spit on which the meat was roasted. You know, it was just a much more specialized experience on average at the upper end of society. I'm talking the kitchens of the wealthy. Obviously, the lower down you go, the less specialized the kitchen staff becomes, until by the time you're reaching probably the bottom 80%, there's 1 or 2 people doing everything. But yeah, in a kitchen that could have afforded almond milk, I suspect there would have been someone whose sole job was every day to make almond milk when they needed it. Wouldn't that be nice to have the time and the staff to be able to prepare everything freshly as it was needed?
Ayla's leaving. She has to go to work.
Oh, Ayla, thank you for joining us. I'm sorry you have to go to work.
Thanks for such a fun stream. You've quickly become my favorite channel.
Oh, welcome to my community, Ayla. It's wonderful to have you. Have a lovely day at work. I hope to see you later. Okay. So back to the topic of beans. Fava beans look like this. And I know some of you probably remember fava beans from Hannibal Lecter. They were one of his favorite beans, the lovely Chianti and a side of fava beans. But fava beans are really they're a nice bean. They're big and they're meaty. They have a nice neutral flavor, so they lend themselves well to basically being turned into anything. And a lot of medieval fava bean dishes are bean mashes. So it's one of those a very frequent, a very common source of starch. And as far as I can tell, fava beans were accessible to everyone. It was a legume that was generally accessible. So it was not a legume of the wealthy, but the wealthy did eat them also. So, this is, again, a dish made of fava beans is something that the majority of people would have eaten, and did in fact eat. And a lot of the medieval recipes for fava beans acknowledge what people understood back then, and many people have forgotten now, that you need to soak beans, sometimes for multiple days, to actually make them more digestible. It's not just about cooking them, it's about actually breaking down the phytonutrients that legumes have, because beans, they're a seed, and they are actually coated. The outside of the seed is coated in anti-nutrients that are designed to exit your digestive tract, pre-fertilized with the micronutrients from your body, from the food you have eaten. So by soaking the beans, and fermenting them does even better, you actually break down those phytonutrients, the phytic acid, and you actually also, if you soak it long enough, you cause sprouting to happen, and that unlocks a whole host of micronutrients inside the bean and makes them digestible and bioavailable. So medieval people understood this, which is why pretty much all legume recipes I've read from the Middle Ages involve a overnight soaking at least. And it's not just a question of softening them for boiling, because you don't need to soak them to soften them for boiling. Yeah. Okay. Add a little more water, bit at a time. A lot of, speaking of almond milk making, a lot of medieval almond milk recipes also acknowledge the dangers of, even in a mortar and pestle, of your almonds getting too hot as part of the grinding process, because especially if you're working with one of these really big mortars and pestles, and you can really get a lot of force and you can get speed even to your action, what can happen, some of the recipes actually say, if you need to add water at the in stages gradually, so that the oil doesn't separate out, because you don't want the oil to separate out from the almond. You want it to come out as an emulsion, basically. And some medieval recipes actually acknowledge this in the instructions for making almond milk.
Bill Hall asks, here in Appalachia, beans are often made into cakes and fried or baked. Because it's common in the Middle Ages.
Beans in the Middle Ages we have a lot of pie recipes involving beans, actually. So a lot of recipes where you actually make a mixture of beans and spices and onions, sometimes cheese even, and put that in a pie crust, in a coffin, it was called, and then bake it. Making it into cakes. A cake like we might understand it, if you're talking about a cake like a fluffy thing that you can cut that's leavened with a chemical leavener like baking soda or baking powder, no, never. That kind of dessert, that kind of pastry, baked good didn't exist in the Middle Ages at all. But in terms of, if you just take beans and mash them, make a mash out of them, and then make them into like little patties, and then do something with them. I can't recall seeing something like that offhand, but that doesn't mean that it didn't happen. But in terms of the fluffy cake-like, a cake that's like a dessert-like cake, didn't exist in the Middle Ages. We just didn't have the ability for it to exist in the Middle Ages, because chemical leaveners are what allow that to happen, and chemical leaveners were invented at the end of the 18th century. Patties. Oh, patties. Okay, good. Well, still needed to get the information out there about cakes, because people often ask me about cakes, like fluffy, yummy, sweet cakes. I haven't seen any recipes for legume patties, but that doesn't mean it's not out there. I just haven't found it yet. Yep. Okay, so tongs. We're now going to, you know what? I'm going to see if I'm going to do a test. Haha! I found a use for the almond peel. I'm going to use this to test the heat of this oil, because we want it to be hot enough that it doesn't just become oily, but we don't want it to burn so much that it becomes problematic. Now, that being said, the benefit of us having baked it first means that I don't think there's any raw egg yolk left inside, which also means that this final stage is just about infusing the dough, the coffin, as it's called, with the oil. So we're just going to do this. We're going to do it. We're going to see what happens. Okay, I've placed it in. It is boiling. I'm increasing the heat a little bit.
Why do you do that? Christina says, in Asia, beans are a common dessert.
They are. Yeah, we actually have spent a lot of the last 12 years in Korea, and beans are, made. Bean paste is used for all manner of things. They do make bean paste here into little cakes. I actually recently had a rice flour based cake that was frosted in nothing but bean paste in different colors. They actually made little roses that looked like the typical American frosting roses, but it was out of bean paste. Yeah, bean paste here is very often atsuki bean paste is often used. I just flipped the pastry. Atsuki beans are often used here. There's all kinds of buns that are stuffed with sweetened bean paste. Rice, there's little rice cakes. They're chewy, kind of like mochi, but a little bit more chew than mochi, less soft, more chew, that has, bean paste on the inside. Yeah, in Asia, bean paste is the thing, which is interesting because, in Europe, they have legumes and it's a very large part of the diet, but I just haven't seen much evidence for it being used to make a sweet thing, interestingly. Mung beans also, yep.
Bill Hall says in Hawaii, guri is red beans sweetened and eaten on ice cream.
Yeah, in Korea here, that might have been introduced. The Hawaiian thing, I think the Japanese introduced that because here in Korea we have bingsu, which is shaved ice or shaved ice milk, and it's the traditional version is topped with sweetened red beans, atsuki beans, basically, it's that as far as I know that was introduced during the Japanese colonial period. So it wouldn't surprise me if it wasn't the Japanese immigrants in Hawaii who introduced the red bean on top of ice cream. Okay, well, damn it, it splattered me. Oh well, the skin will heal. Okay, so here we have our first one. It's lightly golden. I'm gonna put it on the olive board, cutting board. Flipping that one over. I'm just gonna run some. I'm going to take care of this minor grease burn on my hand. I almost never burn myself. Oh well. Okay, so it smells good. Yeah, it smells nice. It smells really nice. So there's how it looks. Right. All right.
Yeah, I don't like the Korean fruit salad, the chopped fruit with the mayonnaise. No.
Oh, God, no. Oh, yuck. Yeah, chopped fruit with mayonnaise. No, right out. But that was something that was America had invented something like that in the 50s. What is it? Watergate salad? Water something salad, or maybe it was the 70s. Yeah, that fruit salad with a mayonnaise base. Gross. Gross. But everyone has their own taste. To each their own. Hopefully people who like fruit salad with a mayonnaise base like something that don't like something that I do like, therefore balancing the universe. Okay.
Oh, God, I'm stupid. Yeah, I'm dumb.
What?
Cool Cat asks, what's in the center? I'm like, the center, and I'm like looking at the screen, and it's like, okay, well, I see the egg whites. What's in the center of what you're making? Okay,
so Cool Cat, if you're just, right, thank you for asking for those who are just joining us. Okay, so these are the petit pernot that we made at the beginning. If you're just joining kind of nowish and you didn't see the process of making these little pastries, once we're done with the live stream, just, go back to the beginning and watch from the beginning. So these are petit pernot. They're basically fritters. And in the center, we have egg yolk, dates, raisins, ginger, and a little bit of sugar, just a little bit of sugar, all mixed together and then rolled up in the pastry dough. We then baked it in the oven and then we fried it to finish it up to give it some lovely greasy yumminess. And so, yeah, that's what we have here. And I'm going to let these sit a little bit before we cut into them. So this is, I can tell that this would be something that once you baked it would probably be pretty shelf stable for days. So if you're looking for like a medieval hiking food, for instance, something to bring with you on pilgrimage, or if you're looking for something to make in advance and bring with you to a medieval living history event where you don't have to care about it being refrigerated, this would be it. I'm pretty certain that this would be just fine over several days without refrigeration. Now, I'm not talking about in 100-degree heat. I mean at normal temperatures. Oh, is Takeda back? Takeda, welcome back, my dear.
I just realized that I forgot to use your code on the armor and casting order I put in.
Aw. You can actually, Takeda, you could actually reach out to them. I mean, to get the extra 10% off. Yeah, I don't get a commission on that. That's just for them to know that I'm getting the word out there. By the way, Armor and Castings are the people who made this amazing little beautiful gem. This is a replica of an original that was actually owned by Beatrice d'Este, and she's has several portraits in which she's depicted with this gem. And Armor and Castings makes a whole host of gorgeous replica jewelry. And if you go to their website and you order something and enter the code Contessa 10, you'll get an extra 10% off. And I think we have some of their products tagged, maybe.
We do.
Yeah, so if you look at the shopping, if you look at the products that are linked to this live stream under the shopping tab or the little icon of products floating around in the top left, I think. If you click on that and you actually purchase it, then I do get a commission. I do get a kickback. I will just openly admit that. But here's the deal. I don't tag any products that I wouldn't or haven't bought myself. I do not believe in rampant consumerism, and I don't believe in promoting products that aren't worth owning.
Do they make chatelaines?
Good question. I don't know. That's a good question. Was it Susan who asked?
No.
Oh.
Christina.
Christina, we will look. We'll just quickly go do a search and see if they actually make any replica chatelaines. I would be shocked if they didn't, because they have a massive range of replica items because they've been in business for so long and they're constantly looking for new items to reproduce. You know, so I would be surprised if they didn't.
0 results.
Oh, but it might be called something else.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out. Or if I spelled it wrong. How do you spell it? Chatelaine, maybe. That's like one of the several spellings you could have used. Just try chat and see if that can. No?
No, their search engine is not particularly robust like that, unfortunately. Trying to think what else a chatelaine might be called in general, if you were to look for it. Okay. See this lovely, lovely almond mash. I take it no one came up with a good use for almond mash once the milk had been extracted from it. One final stirring. Going to also check on our Nigella seeds to see if they are done yet.
Mason says he got his St. George pendant from Armor and Castings and has no regrets. It was much cheaper than he thought it would be and much better quality.
Yeah, thank you for that feedback, Mason. Armor and Castings make amazing quality products at super reasonable prices. And the crazy thing is, every time they raise their prices to acknowledge the realities of inflation, they put out this post, and I know they feel badly about raising prices, but the reality is that their prices are already crazy low for the kind of quality you're getting. I'm not certain if
chatelaines on here, but I don't know Raspberry Studios.
So the Nigella seeds are they're softer. It's a powerful flavor. That's pretty intense. So I'm wondering about the ratio of this Nigella Wow, that's powerful. I'm wondering about the ratio of the Nigella seed to almond milk that is expected here. This is intense. Oh my goodness. Wow.
It's Contessa 10, right?
Contessa 10. Yep.
It's a capital. Doesn't matter.
I don't think it matters. Okay, straining part 2 for the almond milk.
Somebody finally bought something off of the site that's like
Medievally related?
yeah, medieval wooden lucid.
Oh. Finally, someone bought something among the products we've tagged that we tagged that's medievally relevant. Oh, so nice.
Weirdly, it doesn't show it up there.
Okay. Here is the pre-strained almond milk. I am now pouring it into the cloth. Okay. Gathering it up, squeezing it out.
Maybe that's just a.
Mm-hmm.
I have no idea. I don't understand myself. So it's weird.
Look at all that lovely, lovely almond milk just streaming straight out.
Oh, Thamakor asked a good question about armor and castings.
Okay.
Wondering if I could get a custom period signet ring through them.
Yes, Armor and Castings absolutely do custom pieces, and they love custom signet ring pieces. So reach out to them 100% and tell them that the Contessa sent you. They will be happy to work with you. Yep, they do any kind of custom piece, really. They're fantastic. I reached out to them. Oh, could you go get the Burgundian belt, the wide Burgundian belt? Let me show you a custom piece I had them make for me a couple of years ago. Actually, at this point, what year is it? It's been about 3.5 years ago. I had them make, I wanted a really wide Burgundian belt, Franco-Burgundian belt, the kind of sexy wide belt that you see in the portraits of all the super stylish ladies from Burgundy and France and England from like the 1470s, right? And they had a narrower one, but I wanted a nice wide version.
It's tagged on the website.
Which is, yeah, it's tagged on our website. So this is, the narrow version of this is tagged. The belt, we made the belt ourselves, but they made this. That's the metal pieces. Isn't that gorgeous? And you can see what I mean when I say it's wide. She's wide. Look at that. So sexy. If you want to know how we made this, there's actually a full-length project vlog on making this belt from, not the buckle, not making the metal parts, taking the metal parts and turning it into this beautiful, beautiful finished girdle, as it would have been called in 15th century English. But yeah, this is a custom piece that they made for us. So yes, they absolutely do custom pieces. They're super enthusiastic about them. Anything you want, figure it out. And they will do it in a quality manner, and they're super friendly, and they stand by their product. So yeah. Okay. So here we have our almond milk. Nice.
Yes, Takeda, I did.
What did you do?
Make most of that on a cruise.
No, not most of it. We made some of it.
I did a lot of that on the cruise.
It was a world project.
Enslaved.
It was a world project. Okay. So rich. And the rose water like really makes the flavors pop and also gives it an extra dimension. It's real nice. Okay, let's go ahead. I am super curious. I am super curious. I just inhaled a Nigella seed. Excuse me while I cough. Apparently, that Nigella seed that I tasted to see if it was soft enough, it was hiding and waiting for me to inhale. Whew, it's sitting in that very uncomfortable place that I think is a design flaw in the human body, because it shouldn't be possible to very easily inhale. Okay.
Wide belts are not for short-waisted people like me.
Yeah, no, I have a super long waist. I will fully admit that. Okay, so let's go ahead and do this. Let's see what happens with our petit pernod. Okay, so I'm just going to cut it open like this. Okay, here is what it looks like on the inside. Doesn't that look pretty? That looks really nice. Okay, here we go, everyone. Mmm. Mm-hmm. So it tastes it tastes really nice. So I can taste the saffron in the dough, in the paste, and the paste itself, it's not very sweet. It's not sweet at all, in fact. But it absorbed enough of the tallow that there's, you have the benefits of the fat, but it's not greasy at all. And the inside is soft and sweet, but not cloyingly sweet, and it has a really nice texture. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I would make this again, and I would serve this to people I liked.
Aaron says on the shape of an Oompa Loompa, as it is so fitting guard is hard. Might stick to a narrower belt though.
Yeah.
And Takeda says finally getting around to making my wife a nice demescent belt using some other fittings.
So Petit Pernod for the win. This is a winner. This is definitely good. Yeah. The because it's made out of cassava flour, it's a little harder and crunchier than it would be if it had been made out of wheat. But it's still really good. And in fact, I might fry this one again at a lower temperature so that more of the oil actually absorbs. So for those who don't know much about deep frying or shallow frying, full stop. The hotter your oil is, the less the oil will be absorbed into your food stuff. The cooler your oil is, the more the oil will be absorbed into your food stuff. So if you want oil to actually penetrate into the item that you are frying, then you want it to be at a lower temperature. The higher the temperature, the less it's going to absorb into the dough, for instance. So I think I might actually do this, give one of this a quick dip again at a lower temperature for it to absorb a bit more of that delicious, delicious grass-fed tallow that I have. But even still, this is super yummy. And I suspect that the crust, even though it's a little harder than I might perhaps like, I suspect it will soften as it absorbs moisture from the air and that sort of thing. Yep, but Petit Pernod for the win. Really yummy. Yep, okay. Well, there's one successful recipe. Now let's turn to what I'm pretty certain is going to be a failure. So these are our nigella seeds. Right. They are soft-ish. I mean, they're soft enough that I can crumble them between my fingers. So I guess that's soft by what they mean. They are, however, really intense in flavor. So you know what I'm going to do? Because I don't want to waste my very labor-intensive, expensive almond milk on a whole bowl of this. I'm going to do a little mini serving of this recipe as I interpret it. And we'll see what happens. Okay, so the nigella soup recipe. The nigella soup says, to prepare a nigella for the Bohemians, boil the nigella until it becomes soft. It's soft. Discard the water. Mix it with almond milk and a bit of saffron. Okay, so we're going to do the saffron and the almond milk this way. And this is how I would recommend you do it. Again, this is one of those situations whereby I think the recipe has either purposefully excluded a step because the cook wants to be hired by whomever is reading this, or it's taken for granted that you're going to understand this. Specifically, how best to incorporate saffron into anything. And that is, if you have a liquid. First off, this is saffron. Let me show you what saffron is. This is saffron. Saffron is the excuse me. Oh.
Did you inhale the saffron?
No, I inhaled the nigella seed, and it's still lurking somewhere in that purgatory between your gullet and your respiratory tract. Anyway, it is the stamen of a saffron crocus, a specific kind of crocus. It's extremely expensive because there are only 2 per crocus, basically, and it's a specific kind of crocus, not just any crocus, and it has to be manually harvested. A machine has yet to be designed that can harvest this. So it's very labor intensive to grow, it's very labor intensive to harvest, it's very labor intensive to process. It's basically manpower all the way, baby. I think you can till the field using machines, and you can, I don't know about the bulbs, maybe use a machine to plant the bulbs, but the rest of the process, it's all manual. So it's labor intensive. True saffron smells very pungent, but in a pleasant way. And it's narrow, it's thin and really beautifully red with occasional streaks of yellow like this. If you go to certain markets, and I'm thinking places like Egypt, for instance, you go to a spice market somewhere in the Middle East or the Levant, if it's a tourist spice market and they're selling you saffron, you are very likely to get scammed. They will sell you dandelion petals or some other random yellow flower petal or some red flower petal, right? And they will tell you that it's saffron. I had a friend who went to Egypt and asked me what I wanted. I said, oh, if you could pick me up some saffron. And he came back and he brought me, he's held up this giant bag of saffron very proudly. And I looked at it and I said, oh, thank you. That's so kind of you. But as I looked at it and I knew immediately that it was dandelion flowers, petals, basically. So beware of scams. Now, saffron, the best way to use saffron is not just to drop the strings into your dish directly. If there is a liquid in the dish, then what I like to do is actually put the saffron in a mortar. There was actually a medieval, the 16th century Persian cookbook actually suggested this. It actually says when you're grinding your saffron, add some salt or sugar into the mortar, and it will allow it to, it will help it grind, and it will prevent it from just kind of becoming a paste on the inside of your mortar. 16th century Persian cookbook for the win. So we're going to use that technique. So we grind our saffron, right? Add a little bit of salt as well, or not, because I don't know where the salt, there it is. Add a little salt for a little more granularity, since we would add salt anyway to flavor this. Okay. And then we're going to add the almond milk into the mortar, and I'm not going to add much because I don't want to waste much of this precious almond milk. We're going to do like exactly a spoonful worth of this to see how it turns out. And then you can see how that turned yellow, that beautiful shade of yellow, trying to show it to you without pouring it out. Beautiful shade of yellow. And this way you waste the minimal amount of saffron that you possibly could. And this way also your saffron is very evenly distributed through the whole liquid and not just some strings floating around with some minor yellow pockets around it. Okay, here we go. Taste. Well, the saffron almond milk tastes delightful. Let's see about those nigella seeds. Okay. So I'm just going to scoop out a little bit. A very little bit, in fact. I'm going to strain the water out. Okay. Okay. I mean, a little bit. Okay, I'm just going to dip this into my almond milk broth, basically. I might need more Nigella to get give it a fair shake. Okay. I put so much effort into making that almond milk. I just don't want it to go to waste. And this making things this way, the slow way, the labor intensive way, actually absolutely imbues me with a greater respect for those ingredients, those foodstuffs, and definitely makes me more creative and innovative in seeking out ways to not waste it, even if it goes wrong. Okay, so here we go. We've got our Nigella seeds in our milk, in our almond milk. They are soft, so they're also very bitter. Exceedingly bitter. You would need, basically, the ratio of almond milk to Nigella seed would have to be, I don't know, like 10 Nigella seeds per spoonful of almond milk. So this recipe is a bit mysterious to me. I was excited when I found a unique use for Nigella, but, you know, unless I'm looking for the word, yeah. Geet. I'm going to have to look up the Latin word that they use here and see if it might be a bad translation. The Latin word, the bad 15th century macaronic Latin word is geet, G-I-T. I should probably not have trusted their translation, because I actually often object to the translation of Marco Gavio de Rubens. It's very clear English is not his native language, and that can result in issues sometimes. Oh, is Laurie there? Laurie, yay, you made it. So I'm going to have to actually do a little bit more research on what geet might be, G-I-T, in 15th century Latin, because I'm having real issues imagining an entire soup of this very pungent, very bitter spice, this very bitter seed, as being something that anyone would eat. It's overpowering. So, like, this is the ratio that I would have to do. That little tiny black line right there. Yeah, that's the maximum number of seeds I would want to the whole spoonful of the delicious, yummy saffron almond milk. Yeah, that's an okay ratio. That's good. But I can't imagine that's what they're talking about. Of course, we don't know, because the original recipe provides goose egg in terms of quantities, right? So we've got, to prepare Nigella for the Bohemians, boil the Nigella until it becomes soft. No quantities mentioned. Discard the water, mix it with almond milk and a bit of saffron. You know, so for all we know, it could be that you're just supposed to have just enough Nigella seeds to provide a little bit, some macronutrients and maybe a little bit of intensive flavor to go with the almond milk. But that's maybe that's the only way I can imagine this dish. I'm definitely going to have to do some more research on what geet is in 15th century Latin to see if I might think it's actually something else they're talking about. Yeah. Okay. Well, have any of you tried making a soup with just Nigella black seeds? Whew. Yep. I'm not going to call it a fail per se. I'm going to say it's interesting. It's interesting. Okay, well, moving on. Our final dishes for today are going to be two different bean dishes, because I have lots of the fava beans. Fava beans in Korea are cheap and easy to get on Coupang, the Korea's Amazon, basically. And I accidentally ended up ordering 5 kilograms of dry fava beans. So I think I have enough fava beans for the rest of my life, basically. And I'm intending to live at least another 50 years. So I mean it when I say there's a lot. Okay. So fava beans. Fava beans can come in different ways. These were dry and they still had the skin on. So the first thing we're going to have to do is peel them, but that's pretty easy after they've been boiled, as these have. In fact, these were boiled past what they call bursting, so it actually might make the peeling harder. Well, let's go to our first beans, benes ifried, as it would be pronounced in 15th century English, or fried beans in the modernized English. So this recipe comes from a forma of curry, which is that amazing cooking scroll an actual proper cooking scroll, a scroll of recipes that was written in honor of Richard II by the head cook of Richard II of England, his court, his head chef, basically. And this cookbook contains, it's basically haute cuisine of the 14th century, and most of the recipes are very clearly French in origin. And so beans y fried, beans y fried, fried beans. This is how the original recipe reads. Excuse me, in the original 15th century English. Benes y fried. Taka benes and saith them almost till they be bersten. Taka en ring ut the water kleine. Do there 2 onions, y soda and y minced, and garlic therewith. Fry hem in oil, other in gresa, and do there 2 powder douce, and serve it forth. Okay, that's the original 15th century English. Modernized English. Beans y fried. Take beans and boil them until they are almost bursting. Take and wring out the water until they're drained. Add onions, add boiled and minced onions and garlic. Fry it in oil or in grease. Grease would be like lard or tallow. And add powdered douce to it and serve it forth. So here we have our beans. I've already seethed them, but now we have to peel them. And they are not until almost been bursted. A lot of them bursted. So yeah, I actually did mean to proactively peel these in advance, and then what I meant to do was have my condottiero peel them, and I forgot. I forgot to do that. Maybe you dip bread in what?
In whatever it is you're doing. I was distracted.
Oh, maybe they're talking about the Nigella soup.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is a lot of fava.
It's a lot of fava. It's a lot of fava. I fully admit, I forgot how. No Chianti. Actually, so funny thing, the second bean recipe that we'll be making has wine in it, has white wine. How funny is that? So when you're working with fava beans, if they have the peels on, you can peel them most easily after you've soaked them and boiled them, or at least parboiled them, and then the peels come right off. Now, unfortunately, I lost sight of these when they were cooking, and they maybe overcooked a little bit for the purposes of peeling them. So this is not the easiest peeling you will ever see when it comes to fava beans. I promise you it can be much easier than this. I have set myself up for failure on the live stream. That's on me. Yeah. So fava beans, the word which fava beans actually means beans because fava means bean. This was the bean. This was the common bean, basically. When you talked about the bean in medieval Europe, this was probably the bean they were talking about. Yes, there were other legumes, but they had different names. So fava beans, I really like fava beans. They're meaty. If you don't overcook them like I have, they have a nice texture. The overcooking doesn't really matter so much for our purposes because we're going to mash them anyway. So them being a little overcooked is actually okay. If I were going to eat these as, and I wanted them to retain their bean shape, I would not have cooked them for this long. Were you just petting a kitty?
Checking out her chin.
Oh, poor baby. Beans have a lot of protein and a lot of fiber, which, from that perspective can make them very nutritious. If you pre-soak them, as I mentioned earlier, and even let them sprout, which these soaked for multiple days and definitely sprouted, that actually makes them much more nutritionally available and much better, much more digestible, makes them easier on your body, reduces a lot of the issues that beans can actually cause if you don't soak them and or sprout them. So these have undergone all that process. And a lot of medieval recipes for fava beans actually do discuss soaking them, multiple changes of water. So they also acknowledged the importance of making them more digestible, even though they maybe didn't understand about phytonutrients or bioavailability or any of that. But medieval people were highly intelligent and they understood cause and effect. They absolutely understood cause and effect. It's something I keep having to harp on. No, medieval people had no idea about germ theory. Miasma theory was kind of halfway understanding what was happening, but not entirely. But they could still understand cause and effect. So they understood that when merchants arrived on ships, that they seemed to bring plague with them. And so eventually the Venetians, didn't take them long, figured out that 40 days was about the incubation period for pesta your damn it. Pesta ursensis. Damn it. I don't know why I'm having issues with.
If you know, put it in the chat.
Yeah, pesta ursensis. The pathogen that causes the Black Death, basically, that causes the plague, right? So the Venetians figured out that a 40-day period was what it took, basically, for it to incubate and show signs in the entire ship's population. And so hence the quarantine was created, 40 days, during which a ship was not allowed to come into harbor, right? They didn't understand why necessarily, but they understood that that is what happened. So what is it, Nobby? Oh, little baby, what do you want?
I want to be on TV again.
She wants to be on TV. Well, I'm peeling beans, so I can't pick you up. Our little Nabi, which means butterfly in Korean. Nabi, she's our little baby. She is the tiniest meow. She is the tiniest meow.
Can you meow for the camera?
Meow meow. Hey, little baby.
Meow.
She is the tiniest little meow. She still sounds like a kitten. So I'm not going to peel all of these, so don't worry. I'm just going to peel enough for us to try one or two servings of the recipe, basically. So we have this fried beans recipe, which is it is a kind of refried beans because we cook the beans, we mash them, and then we fry them, right? Doesn't that sound familiar? The difference, of course, is in the spicing. Poudre douce, powder douce means sweet powder. And basically, powder douce is a combination of a variety of sweet spices, such as cloves, cinnamon, ginger, grains of paradise, galangal. There's all kinds of spices that could go into poudre douce. And there's actually a couple of recipes that will actually specify what should go into a poudre douce. So this is basically a spice blend. For those of you who are familiar with Indian cuisine, for instance, or Moroccan cuisine, right? There are pre-made spice blends that are common in those cuisines, like, garam masala in Indian cuisine, or darn it, the name for the really delicious spice blend in Moroccan cuisine has fled from my head. But this is basically the same idea, that you just have this spice blend on hand and you just toss it on everything and it makes everything taste good. So the spicing is going to be different. Yes, they had cumin in medieval European cuisine, but interestingly, this refried bean recipe does not have any cumin. Instead, it has sweet spices. So, we'll definitely have a different flavor profile, but it would go really well with a stew. Right, this kind of savory. You've got the savory of the beans. You've got the sweet spices. You've got salt and olive oil or lard. Right, adding all this flavor. That would actually, I think it will make a very delicious accompaniment for a savory stew, for instance. So have any of you had cooked with fava beans or eaten fava beans? Do you like them? Do you not like them? Are there any beans that don't agree with you? Are there beans that do agree? Some people suffer mightily from the consumption of beans. And in fact, there are some bean recipes, legume recipes in medieval cookbooks that acknowledge the reality of beans causing flatulence. And some of the cookbooks then actually, or the manuals of health, will actually provide some solutions for resolving the flatulence, none of which I think would actually work, but are based on the sympathetic idea of medicine from the Middle Ages. The idea that if you have a problem, then the solution, physical health problem, then the solution for the problem is something that resembles the troubled area of your body. So if you're suffering from some kind of kidney issue, then you should consume some kind of food that is shaped like a kidney and that will help your kidneys, right?
Big Racer's on.
Big Racer, welcome. It's been a while. Thank you for coming. Welcome back.
Christina says, I'm betting if they made this often, they would learn the cooked texture so they could blanch and skin, then get it back to the correct consistency. Yeah, probably.
Yeah. So in my case, I forgot that the beans, I didn't set a timer. So I know how long to cook these for to make it correct. I did not set a timer. So that's on me. But yes, if someone cooked these often enough, right? If you cook these every day, you would just know this is roughly how long it takes to cook them properly. Like this one is the perfect consistency right there. Look at that. Isn't that nice? And they didn't, that's the other thing. They didn't all cook at the same rate, which is interesting. Also, they were all in the same pot and they didn't all cook at the same rate. So that's fun. That's super fun. And you can get beans, you can get fava beans that have already been peeled. So you don't necessarily have to also go through this peeling process yourself. You do, however, if they are not peeled, you do have to remove the skin though. You do not want to eat these with the skin on. It's not pleasant. Not pleasant.
Oh, wow.
Hmm.
I'm doing the Busan aquarium thing, and I just noticed there was a black axolotl in the tank.
Ooh, cool.
That I didn't notice until just now.
Okay.
Thomas Haley said, we always cook the galangal before adding it to curry. Yeah. And Tanya Browden.
Mm-hmm.
Say hi, Tanya.
Tanya, lovely to have you back. Welcome back.
I absolutely love full madames.
Ah, full madame. Yeah.
And fava bean stew that my Syrian friend makes.
Yeah, full madame is very tasty. Yeah, I love fava beans. I do love them. It's so nice that I can get them for really inexpensively here in Korea. As I for those who didn't hear, I accidentally purchased 5 kilograms of them, dried fava beans for, I don't know, $20 US, which is, I think, an insanely little amount of money. Yeah. So, yeah, love fava beans. A lot of the beans that people now use kind of worldwide, actually, like kidney beans, are New World beans. They are not Old World beans. Oh, I learned, speaking of carbohydrates and starch sources, I learned something very interesting about potatoes today. Potatoes were actually adopted in cuisine after the Columbian Exchange first in China, because China has historically a really a capricious climate, shall we say. And China can go through periods where the rains come regularly and the crops grow well, and then there can be decades of drought. And potatoes are very resilient to drought and can grow even in adverse conditions because, they come from the Andes. And apparently in the Ming Dynasty, the Ming Emperor figured that out, and so introduced potatoes as a way to fight off famine. And it worked. It actually worked. And potatoes took off so heavily in Ming Dynasty China that the production of rice noodles almost ceased entirely. Noodle production almost ceased entirely. Potatoes took it over so heavily. Unfortunately, the potatoes were not in, this was introduced at the end of the 16th century and were actually consumed. Unfortunately for the Ming Dynasty, it was too little too late, and the people still blamed the Ming emperors for the failure of crops and for the massive famine, which paved the way for the Qing Dynasty to take over, as often happens. And I never thought about it, but I should have. All the revolutions in Europe that happened in the 19th century, not all the revolutions, sorry. The 1848 revolutions that happened all across Europe were a response to the potato blight everyone thinks about the potato blight and they think about the Great Starvation in Ireland, but in fact, the potato blight was a European-wide effect. And by the mid-19th century, potatoes had become an essential part of diets all across Europe. So when the potato blight comes, people start starving. And the second people actually start starving is when they start looking at people in power and saying, why do you get to have wealth and power, and why aren't you starving just because you were born in that palace? And so that it's actually, it's actually the potato blight that in large part led to the actual action of the revolutions of 1848 in Europe. How fun is that? Meanwhile, the potato comes to Europe in the 16th century, and apparently it was automatically viewed, because of how it looked, as being something satanic. For one, it grew in the ground. It's a tuber, so of course it grew closer to Satan. Two, frequently the potatoes looked like people, but like twisted, warped people. So it was assumed that if you ate it, it would either lead to demonic possession, or people believed that it would give you syphilis, or that it would give you leprosy. And these were really closely held beliefs. People really seriously believed this stuff for a long time in Europe. Well, then it doesn't help that I think was it Sir Francis Drake, or was it Raleigh? Raleigh. I think it was Raleigh. Raleigh convinced Elizabeth I of England to actually include potatoes in a feast. He handed the potato plants, the whole thing, roots, greens, everything, to the cooks, but didn't bother to tell them about how to prepare it. So apparently they tossed out the tubers, the potato part of the potato plant, and they kept the green part, which is toxic, and they cooked and served the green part. Everyone got sick, and that basically cemented the idea that potatoes were a no-go in England. And meanwhile, eventually, the Catholic countries figure out that, okay, potatoes are actually not bad. They start eating them. So by the 18th century in England, people are rejecting potatoes still because they're popish. They're associated with being Catholic. It's so fascinating. How the history of these foodstuffs ties so closely into political developments, to religious developments. It's the unintended consequences of that.
Okay. Lori asked, what were the old world beans apart from fava?
So Lori, good question. I don't necessarily know all of the old world, and it depends on what you mean by old world, right? So if you're talking about Eurasia, there's a much wider range of beans that are being consumed in the East than there are in the West. But lentils are old world. Peas, certain kinds of peas are, dry peas are old world. Let's see, other kinds of beans that would have been consumed in Europe. I feel like I'm missing some key ones in medieval Europe.
There had to be a ton, and I don't know.
Well, no, I don't think there were a ton. You don't necessarily. Yeah, but those, I don't necessarily know all of the cultivars that were available, or the beans that were available. Sorry, I want to have another bite of this.
John McGowan says, new to your stream, loving it. An easy way to peel fava is after cooking, shock them in cold water, the peels slide right off.
Yep. That is correct, John. You are right. They do work best if after you boil them, you put them in cold water, the peels come right off. I unfortunately forgot about them and overcooked them. So that's on me. That's okay. Okay, so we're going to work with this little bit of beans. Yeah, the peels were coming off real easily before they got overcooked. Okay, sorry, we're working with our beans they fried. Right, okay, so take beans, sieve them, take them out, wring out the water clean. Do their 2 onions, y soda, and y minsta. Right, okay, so I'm going to...
Yo, you're back.
Who's back?
Alternate account. Oh, you're back.
Oh, I'm back.
Only on their stream.
Well, welcome back. Thank you for joining us again. Alternate account, was that the name of the alternate account? Welcome back. Thank you for joining us.
And going back to the thing about China, Thamakor says, oh, that's a weird fact for my kids, me being of Irish descent and their mother being Cantonese. Okay.
That is, yeah, I am fascinated by food and history across the world, so I don't limit my learnings to just Europe or just the Middle Ages. Okay, onions. So we're going to, we need to do there two onions y soda and y minced. So onions that have been boiled and minced. And so we're going to boil it first. Now, some people say, oh, you don't need to go through the boiling process. That's just something they needed to do in the pre-modern world because onions were fertilized with night soil. And so they've realized that the outcomes were better. I just really kind of, they realized that the outcomes were better if you first boiled the onions and then cut them up and cooked them than if you just cut them and cooked them. However, you're going to get a different texture also if you parboil your onions first and then you mince them. Oh, damn it. I started peeling. I need another whole onion.
Where did I put the onions at?
I don't know.
I remember where I put them.
I need another whole onion because what you want to do is, because it says here, it says do there two onions y soda and y minced. So to me that says that we boil it first and then we mince it. But I am going to give it a rinse first because these are dirty onions. So we are going to put this onion, we're going to bring the water to a boil first. We're going to put the onion to boil it for a little bit, and then we're going to peel it and mince it after that. Some necessary in a modern kitchen, but it changes the texture drastically if you boil an onion first and then mince it, or if you just and then fry it, or if you just mince it and fry it. You get a different texture, by the way. Okay, so first we'll bring our water to boil, like so. I need more counter space. Hey, little baby. And also, I need something to drink. I'm a little thirsty. Been talking for almost 3 hours at this point. Okay. Okay, take and wring out the water clean. Do their two onions, garlic, fry them in oil or in grease. Yeah, okay. Garlic. Here we have garlic. Now, the recipe says nothing about, it says mince the onions, but it doesn't say anything about what to do with the garlic. We're going to mince the garlic. We're not just going to put whole cloves of garlic in to our beans. And I've got, again, there's no quantities here. I really like garlic though. I like onions also. So I'm going to go ahead and just mince up six cloves of garlic. I mean, I live in Korea where garlic is treated like a vegetable in and of itself anyway. And garlic would have been something that to which everyone in the Middle Ages would have had easy access, plentiful access. You can dry garlic if you need to. It grows a lot of the year and possibly could have even been available through the winter, depending on which part of the Middle Ages you're talking about. So 6 cloves it is. And I'm going to mince it fairly fine because I want my garlic to distribute maximally through the beans ifried, benes ifried. So need to get rid of all of these peels that have just piled up here. I get talking and then forget to do things like bus my cooking area.
Somebody who could help you.
Yeah, I don't know. Is there someone who could help me?
I don't know.
I know there are other legumes. Why can't I think of them beyond? No, you can't. Yeah. Well, not just that. It's a small space. It's okay. I'll figure it out. Nabi, oh my goodness. I don't know. Can you all hear her squeaking? She is so desperate.
Turned on the other mic.
Did you? Oh.
What do you say, Nabi?
Little baby. She, our cat, our little Nabi, she loves us to play with the laser pointer with her. She also occasionally insists that we sit down so she can get in our lap and she can just sit and we will pet her. She's, yeah, she knows what she wants, shall we say. Like most cats do, she definitely knows what she wants.
She wanted the laser pointer.
She wanted the laser pointer. Okay. Of course she did. You bring this water to a boil, and then we're just going to put the whole onion in there. And yeah, fry them in oil so everything gets fried in the oil. So it actually makes sense that you want to parboil your onions because if you're just going to toss everything in the pan and fry it, then your onions being parboiled actually jumpstarts that cooking process and, you know, allows the beans, which are also already cooked, and the onions to basically be done at the same time, rather than having raw onions added into your beans, because it doesn't say anything about frying the garlic and the onions separately. It says add the onions to the beans, add the onions and garlic to the beans and fry them in oil or grease. So it's not a question of you fry the onions first and then add them to the beans. No, this is with the exception of the parboiling the onion, but I could probably actually make this a one pot dish even with that, right? So this can really be turned into, even medievally, this could be turned into a one pot dish if you did it cleverly enough. Okay. Oh, garlic. Garlic is proof that God loves us. I don't even know if God exists. I don't have that sense of a supreme being, the existence of a supreme being. So, you know, when I say things like that, it's like, intellectually, I can prove the existence of a supreme being like God, but I don't have the inherent faith that there is such a creature. Does that make sense? Yeah. Welcome to my medieval cooking party for those just joining. If you have been watching and enjoying, please double tap your screen and consider subscribing.
What kind of oil are you using to fry the beans?
Yes, so that is a good question. So we have here the distinction, fry him in oil oder in grasa, oil or grease, right? So grease is lard or tallow or some other rendered animal fat. Oil would be like a seed oil, like olive oil, like walnut oil. And that could vary depending on where you are, what the oil to which you would have had easy access in the Middle Ages. Okay, I just turned that water off.
And what are we cooking today? Eric Gassman.
Eric Gasman, welcome back, my friend. We have been cooking several things today. We're already to the third set of recipes. So the first thing we cooked was petit pernot, these lovely fritters with a filling of egg yolk, raisins, and dates, and wrapped in a dough and then baked and then fried, deep fried in tallow. Turned out super, super delicious, really yummy. Handsome, would you like to try?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And then the second thing we tried was interesting but overpowering, was Nigella soup, which is black seed, Nigella sativa, boiled until it's soft and then mixed with almond milk and saffron. And the ratio of black seed to saffron has to be such, honestly, in my opinion, that mostly what you're eating is almond milk and saffron with just a little bit of Nigella to add some flavor and texture. So it was okay in that quantity, but I couldn't imagine eating it in any kind of large sort of fashion. And now we are going to be doing Beines y Fried, which are basically it's a 14th century English refried bean recipe from the court of Richard II. Yep. Oh, here they are. Here are our peeled fava beans, peeled and ready to basically be added into the pot. But right now what we're doing is we are parboiling an onion because the recipe says, take beines and save them almost till they be bursten, which they are. Bursten, they are definitely bursted. Take and wring out the water clean. We already did that. Then do thereto onions isoda and imincida. So we're boiling the onion, and then after it's boiled, we will peel it and mince it. We will then add garlic, which we have decided to mince because that makes the most sense to me. And then we will fry it in oil or grease. And in this case, because I'm trying to stick to the Lenten thing, we will be using olive oil. Yep. And olive oil was absolutely available in England as a luxury good. But remember, this is the court of Richard II we're talking about, right? So it could also be walnut oil. Walnut oil, though, would have a much lower cooking temperature. It's a much more delicate oil than olive oil is. And I mean, olive oil's mostly monounsaturated fat, so it has a much higher flash point than walnut oil does. Walnut oil has a higher ratio of polyunsaturated fats, which lowers its flash point, and also means if you cook it too hot, you're actually going to spoil the oil and ruin its flavor. So, yeah. We're just boiling our onion here until it's going to basically cook it until it's more or less soft. What did you think of the petit pernod?
It was pretty good.
Yeah.
I enjoyed it.
I thought it's pretty tasty. I found it pretty tasty myself. Okay, handsome, I'm going to set you to grinding more onions. No, onions is the wrong word. Almonds.
Grinding?
Yes.
You're gonna make me work?
I am going to make you work.
Jeez, where's the pestle?
It's somewhere. Nobby, what is it, baby? What are we not doing for you? Did you stop playing with her?
I did. I stopped playing.
Oh my gosh, more poor cats. Yeah, so these are the petit pernod. They turned out really well. I'm very happy with it. It's definitely tasty. Yeah. It's a bit like a much more sophisticated fig Newton. So the bowl, the interesting thing about the recipe for beans fried, it doesn't say anything about mixing them together, right? It just says fry them in oil or grease and then add poudre douce. And this is our poudre douce. This is a blend of galangal, ginger, cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, and another spice. Right, so this is that sweet. Poudre douce literally means sweet powder. There's also poudre forte, which means powerful powder. So that is one that has long pepper in it. It is a spice blend that has long pepper in it and other really powerful spices in it. So, yeah, I wish I could somehow get when you're receiving, on the receiving end, that you could somehow taste these things that I've made.
What would the cheapest and most available oil be back in those days?
The cheapest and most available oil would vary based on where you were. Because for seed oils, for instance, it would be very local. But honestly, the thing that the cheapest cooking, if you're asking about cooking fats, the cheapest cooking fat probably would have been lard. And that would have been something to which everyone basically had access. Lard would have been the cooking fat part, of the majority of the people. Oils would have been more expensive because nuts require a lot of processing, and they only really come into season one time a year, and they didn't have the kind of mass production that we now have of nuts, and they certainly didn't have the equipment to mass produce nut oil, seed oils, the way we do now, nut oils mostly. So the most common cooking fat would have been lard, followed by tallow. So, but mostly lard. And that would be, and in some cooking sources, the word oil actually refers to both oil and lard. It refers to both, like some cooking sources don't distinguish between them, others do. So, welcome to the confusing world of language where not everyone uses words in the same way to mean the same thing. Isn't that fun? A little more water for me while our onion parboils. Oh, and one of the good reasons for parboiling any kind of vegetable in the medieval world is that the primary fertilizer was night soil, human night soil. but any kind of animal night soil, but especially human night soil. Night soil is, we're called that because it is generally acknowledged that something that people did mostly at nighttime, apparently. It's human waste matter. And it was used, it was farmed, it was harvested, it was collected by someone called a gong farmer, who would actually go around the village or town and clean out people's septic, scoop out people's septic tanks, like mucking out a horse stall. But instead of dumping it in a pile somewhere in the forest, he would take it and he would sell it to farmers for fertilizer. And even though people didn't understand germ theory in the Middle Ages, they understood cause and effect. And they understood, no doubt, that if you ate vegetables from a field and you didn't wash them and or thoroughly and or parboil them, then the outcomes were bad, digestively speaking, right? So, again, they didn't understand germ theory, but they understood that if you parboil that onion and you eat it, all is well. If you don't parboil that onion and you eat it, or it all is not well. So there's a lot of recipes in a variety of medieval cookbooks across the Middle Ages, across Europe, that will often call for steps like parboiling vegetables and also parboiling meat. And the meat could be, some people have theorized parboiling the meat because, maybe there had been some bacterial growth on the outside, and parboiling it would obviously eliminate the bacterial growth in the cooking process. Some people say, well, they butchered animals and they ate them pretty fresh. And so it wasn't a question of them going bad because the meat wasn't around long enough for it to spoil. That's a question of debate. But vegetables, for certain, there's no debate. There is no debate. Night soil, using night soil, especially when you're eating something like a root vegetable that's in the soil, that's going to be problematic, right? If you don't parboil it first.
How mashed? How mashed?
Oh, as mashed as you can make it. And then,
taste.
Yeah, basically. Oh, and we should add a little bit of water now. Okay, so I mean, I would do it batch-wise probably, but okay, so now the recipe says isoda, boiled, it's been boiled, and now minced. So let's go ahead and mince it.
Cato says, I'm wondering how much fat from horses was used back then, since rendering horse fat was noted quite often. I wonder if it was used for cooking or industrial, soap, etc.
That's a good question. I haven't seen much references to the use of horse fat anywhere, actually. But animal fat was absolutely used as axle grease all the time. So it wouldn't surprise me if something like horse lard was maybe reserved for industrial applications. Yeah, it's funny how in the modern world most people can't imagine lubricants that are also edible. Well, edible and safely edible.
Edible lubricants?
Oh, okay, whatever. Go away. No one asked you. Wow, this is super hot. I probably should have plunged this in some cold water before attempting this. I got distracted by the question about horse grease. For those who don't know, there are many places in the world where horse meat is eaten, and in Europe, in fact. In Estonia or Finland, for instance, you can still get horse meat. I love horses. I grew up riding horses, raising horses, training horses. I used to do all the things, jumping and racing and etc. So I consider horses to be fellow creatures, but I've eaten horse meat and it's tasty. So just putting that out there. This is what I get for, this was a terrible mince job. Don't watch. This was terrible. This is not how I mince onions normally. Yeah, watch, but don't watch closely. Okay, add some water, a little bit, just a little bit, and then do some more mashing, and then add a cold. I was not paying attention to what I was doing at all. I was focused on my fingers burning from the onion. Yeah, so normally you should plunge that onion into cold water, and then you can proceed to mince it. That's how I would normally do that. Okay, so here's the other thing. A medieval onion would be unlikely to be this big. It would not be this big. Medieval onions were smaller. They also did not have the thick outer skins the way our onions do now, which is why there is zero evidence of onion skins being used for dyeing things in the Middle Ages, because there probably weren't onion skins like we understand them anyway. Onions were smaller. So it would have, parboiling it would have actually penetrated much more deeply than it penetrated on this ginormous modern monstrosity of an onion. It would also make mincing it easier because it would just start off smaller to begin with. And again, this recipe doesn't say anything about quantities. So, we have this much beans. We have this much beans, and we just sort of have to decide what ratio of onions to beans we want. So, that could have been, it could be that, like with many recipes, that was sort of left up to the cook. Did you want your dish to be more or less bean, more or less onion, more or less garlic? What kind of ratios do you want? I will tell you, there are not many vegetable recipes in medieval cookbooks, which does not and absolutely does not mean that medieval people did not eat vegetables. It means that cookbooks skew towards a certain kind of clientele who want a certain kind of dish. And more specifically, that these cookbooks are usually, as I said at the very beginning of this whole adventure, these cookbooks are possibly more intended to be a portfolio of work, of potential work, so that you can see what it is this cook can do and then decide to hire that cook into your own household. Which means that they're not going to include recipes for all the work-a-day boring vegetable dishes, right? They're going to include the recipes for all the complex pies and roasts and sauces. More water. So that's why, to actually get a full idea of the way that medieval people actually ate, it's really crucial to do things like isotope analysis in teeth and bones, because then we can actually get a true scientifically grounded analysis of the diet of every individual person. Because what you eat infects the kinds of isotopes that end up in your teeth, for instance. And there are different isotopes that will end up in your teeth if you eat marine-based protein, if you eat plant-based protein, if you eat terrestrial protein, if you eat plants, if you eat, if you eat green plants, if you eat fruits. So we actually get a much more accurate idea about what people ate from that than from these cookbooks. Okay, I think we're going to call that minced enough.
Micia says, today's onions are storage onions.
They are.
Spread for additional storage time, as have many other vegetables.
Yep, she is correct. Micia, exactly. Onions today have been bred selectively so that they can be not only stored for a long time, but transported over long distances and survive that beating. Nothing, medieval onions, just, they didn't have, that wasn't a thought. That wasn't a consideration.
Eric, so onions are more the size of shallots?
Yes. The question is, were onions therefore more the size of shallots? Yes, they were much more closer to shallots. And frequently they were, they just didn't have these thick skins. So yeah, closer to the size of shallots. Now, what I can't tell you is how, I haven't really done this much research into it. I don't know if they were sweeter or more pungent or more biting than our modern onions are. That I haven't actually looked into that. Okay.
And Sarah Ira says, I remember reading an article about Agnes Sorel, and apparently she ate a lot of meat and vegetables. I think that's an interesting look into the French court at the time.
Yeah, Agnès Sorel, yeah, the royal mistress of Charles VI, right, who was the second queen, and sometimes maybe the first queen, depending on. Yeah, she had a lot of pull in the court. Her life is an interesting one. When you say you read an article about what she ate, do you know how they did the analysis? Did they analyze her bones, or were they looking at records from her expense accounts. I'd be interested to know where they got that information, because those are the sources I love to read. I love expense accounts. I love wills. I love reading the paleontological reports, the osteological reports. That's the word I'm looking for, the osteological reports. Okay, so we're going to, nice, yep, more water.
More?
Yep, more water. Okay, so we've got our onions minced, we've got our garlic therewith. Okay, we're going to go we're going to go ahead and add our, it says friam in olie oder in grease. So oil or grease, we're going to use olive oil. I'm going to put a lot of olive oil in there. Like, I don't know, half a cup, quarter cup, actually a quarter cup for this amount of beans, it's a quarter cup. I'm gonna go ahead and bring that up to heat. Even though it doesn't, again, the recipe doesn't say that. It doesn't say anything about bring your oil up to heat first. I'm going to assume that's part of the process as someone who knows how to cook in general. If you were to add the oil, you could add everything straight to the oil, but it might all absorb the oil too much too fast. So I want that oil to come up to heat, actually. I like my refried beans to be fatty and rich. So fat plays a very important role in diet and not just in flavor. Yes, fat enhances flavors, 100%. That's why back in the 90s and the aughts where there was that dumbass no fat or low fat craze, when they took the fat out of the food, they had to add something else so that it still had flavor. So they added sugar and salt and made things even more bad for your waistline and your pancreas. But the fat also nutrients, vitamins. There are many, I'm live again. Did we drop transmission? Did you all miss anything? What was the last thing you heard me say?
I think so.
I just got a notification that we're live, which I thought we already were, so.
TQ Ergo
Yes.
said, did onions back then still make one cry as bad as they do now? And Sarah Iris said, I think they looked at her stomach remains and her teeth from her remains.
Interesting. I have to look that article up. I want to look up that article on Agnès Sorel. Okay, I am now adding.
I've added too much water now.
Okay. So we've got our beans and our onions. Ooh, that looks nice. No, not at all. Not at all.
Oh, I think I'm done with that bit if you want to.
Okay.
So I can do something else.
Okay. Beines y fruit. And interestingly, the recipe also doesn't say anything about mashing, but it does say to seed them almost till they be bersten. And take and wring out the water clean. Now, the wringing out the water is an interesting turn of phrase. So it isn't just draining the water, it's wringing out the water. And so my feeling is that maybe they should have been put in a cloth and then you would wring them in the cloth. And I suspect that the action of wringing them in a cloth to drain them would have at least semi-mashed them. I mean, not fully mashed them, but I suspect it would have semi-mashed them. And if I really loved you all, I could have demonstrated that and we could have seen what happened. But clearly, I don't really love you all. Now, next time we'll play around with that. Maybe we'll do some fava beans live. We'll cook them live. And then we'll try the wringing out in a cloth and see what happens when they're cooked almost till they be bersten, and then we wring them out. We'll see what happens. Right. Back to fats. So there are micronutrients, vitamins that are fat soluble and that your body can only absorb in the presence of fat. If you do not eat fat, these are crucial vitamins that you will just piss or poop back out again, excuse my language. So for those of you who might be living a low-fat diet, you might want to reconsider that sincerely. Okay, here we go. Just going to let that do its thing here. Now, if this onion had been smaller, so yeah, maybe I probably should have gotten some shallots to be closer to medieval onions. I don't know if medieval onions would have been more or less assaultive, offensive to the eyes. I will tell you a funny secret. If you wear contacts like I do, onions don't bother you when you cut them. They protect my eyes, believe it or not, from the onion. Better than goggles, way better than goggles.
And she still makes me.
And I still make him cut onions. He doesn't have contacts. He can't wear contacts because he has an eye thing. Yeah. So yeah, whether medieval onions would have been more or less pungent, I haven't actually seen any information about that. I'm not a botanist, so my specialty is not plants. If any of you, however, actually know anything about heirloom cultivars of onions that date back to the Middle Ages, if you know the answer to that question of whether medieval onions would have been more or less pungent, i.e. would they still make you cry, I'd be interested to hear that. In general, the trend seems to be that medieval cultivars are less sweet than their modern equivalents, are more intense in flavor than their modern equivalents. But that may or may not apply to the pain-inducing gas that onions off-put when you start cutting them. It smells so good. It really does. And I can tell once we sprinkle on that poudre douce, it's going to be quite nice. Yeah, quite nice indeed. And this would definitely be, I can already tell, this would be a great accompaniment for a stew, right? A nice thick stew of some kind. And medieval people ate stews all the time. They were called pottages. And this was a question from earlier. Would the medieval diet of the, majority of the population, the bottom 80% basically, be very dull because they couldn't afford things like spices? And the answer to that is no. It just would have been differently interesting because they had all sorts of herbs that we don't use anymore and that they used on a very regular basis. So even though they wouldn't have cinnamon and cloves to add to their stews, they had hyssop and lovage and burnet and sorrel and of course, parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme, all of that, but so much more than we now use on a regular basis. And depending on where you lived, you would have different herbs available, herbs being green leafy things, mostly weeds that grow everywhere. It's funny how things have changed. Now, of course, if you're using fresh herbs, that's a sign of wealth because fresh herbs are very expensive in most grocery stores, especially in the United States at any rate, not in Korea. Korean herbs in grocery stores, you can get them in large quantities very cheaply. But of course, traditional Korean herbs are yet a different category of herbs from the ones we have in the West, in Europe. Yeah, very nice. And again, the recipe doesn't give us any idea about timing or what counts as done. It just says, frie hem in oil oder in gräs. Fry it in oil or grease, add poudre douce, and serve it forth. Right. The interesting thing is that the poudre douce comes at the end. It doesn't say whether you should add the poudre douce still in the pan or if you should plate it up and then add the poudre douce. There are some recipes that do specify plate it up and then add the final spice and then serve it. So I'm actually going to suggest that we should add the poudre douce at the very end of cooking, give it a stir, then turn off the heat, because there will be a little bit of heat action that will bring out some of the flavors in the spice mixture that might otherwise emerge if you just sprinkle it on top at the end. But by the same token, we don't want to overcook it and dull some of those flavors by exposing them to too much heat. I'm also going to say that done is probably when the onion is all nice and soft and no longer crunchy and acrid. Soft and sweet and no longer crunchy and acrid. Yeah. Would you maybe eat this on bread, almost like a bean dip? Yeah, I'm confident that this would be, especially on medieval bread. So medieval bread would have been sourdough, and it probably would have been a relatively long ferment, at least 24 hours. and it would have been crusty and it would have been chewy. And so I'm pretty certain that this would be pretty good with bread. Bread was absolutely one of the most common accompaniments of medieval cuisine across all levels of society. When you see depictions of shepherds in the field, if they're sitting and eating, look closely at what they're eating. They've got, unsurprisingly, a bowl of milk, which they probably got from their sheep, their ewes, and they've got a loaf of bread, right? So bread was absolutely the most common thing, and I could definitely see this being eaten with bread. In fact, here's how it probably, if it was eaten with bread, this is probably how it would have been served. You would actually do sops, which are slices of bread that are sometimes dried. You would lay those in a bowl, and then you would put this on top, and then it would kind of soak down into the bread, and then you would eat it. That's a very typical method of serving things with bread, especially stews. Yes, handsome. Thank you for joining us, Mike. Appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed.
Thomas Haley says that's because they didn't have hot dogs. And Sarah Ira asked, what would be the medieval bread recipe?
So medieval bread recipes have to be reconstructed based on our knowledge of what ingredients were available, what technology was available. No actual recipes of bread recipes, proper recipes, have survived from the medieval Europe, and I'm talking before the 16th century. By the 16th century, you start seeing. We do actually have recipes for, what's the word I'm looking for? Enriched breads, breads that are made of flour and eggs and milk, right? Like schola, right? But in terms, the sourdough bread was probably made very simply. It was probably water, flour, and a little bit of salt, and then it was allowed to wild ferment. And they may have used, I read somewhere a theory that they just took a piece of the dough, they retained a piece of the dough from the loaf that was proofing, and then mixed that into the next batch of dough to then sour that dough up. If you lived near a brewer, then you could get, some foamy yeast from the brewing process. Or if you were an alewife yourself, then you would probably have access. You would be able to make your own, fresh yeast basically for your bread. But the point is, no matter what, it was most likely to be a sourdough. It was not a quick leaven bread. Tang for days. But there is, and now that I think about that enriched bread dough, I think I found a recipe from the 15th century for a baked good that read to me like an enriched dough bread, basically milk and eggs and flour. Although it wasn't leavened, no leavening, but eggs and milk and flour. No leavening other than the eggs, because eggs will provide a leavening effect to a certain degree. But medieval bread would have been hearty. The wealthy would have eaten white bread, ironically. The wealthy would have eaten bread made from extremely refined flour. Extremely refined, which meant it would have had zero nutritional value and would have just been pure calories, basically, pure carbo load. People on the lower end of the spectrum couldn't afford something as wasteful as white flour, where a third of the volume had been sifted out. So people on the lower end of the spectrum would have been eating whole grain, but it would have been soured whole grain, which would have made the nutrients much more bioavailable and would have reduced the deleterious impact of phytonutrients of the bran, basically, on their body. So it's a typical case of the poor were actually eating better than the rich. They were eating a more nutritionally varied, rich diet, more nutritionally dense, more bioavailable, better balance, actually, than their wealthy peers.
And Thomas Haley said modern peasant food, hot dog with onions and chili, hamburger and a beer. I think their peasants ate quite well in comparison.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Good point. Modern peasant food is, hot dog with chili and a beer. Yeah, medieval peasants ate a very healthy diet. They really did. Now, one of the problems with the bread that a lot of people ate, but especially the peasants, because they couldn't afford really well ground bread or well sifted bread, a lot of stone dust ended up in the bread because it was stone ground. You ever stop to wonder, what does stone ground mean? Well, it means it's ground on a stone mill, and unfortunately, a lot of times a lot of stone dust ended up in your bread, which means that your teeth would actually wear down over time. But they weren't actually, interestingly, they didn't suffer from the kind of dental decay that would start arising really in the 16th century once sugar production kicked off, really at full steam, hyper production basically, and people started consuming sugar in massively deleterious quantities. So the biggest problem with medieval teeth is that they get ground down, not that they actually, are suffering from a lot of dental decay from rotting and from not taking care of their teeth. It's just that their bread was, well.
And Disco Cat says, speaking of fat-soluble vitamins,
Yes.
people seem to forget the importance of properly cooking veggies. Anti-nutrients like vitamins reduce some absorption.
Yep. And these anti-nutrients, that's what phytic acid is, for instance. These anti-nutrients, if you're not familiar with anti-nutrients, you should become familiar. A lot of vegetables especially have these anti-nutrients that are actually part of the plant survival cycle. And they're designed in some cases to keep them from being eaten by us animals. But humans, man, no one tells us what to do, least of all that plant. So cooking actually in some cases, and depending on the cooking method, makes nutrients more bioavailable because it breaks down things like oxalates. Yep, good. Thank you for bringing that up. Good point. But there are cooking processes that will also then drain the nutrients out of your dish entirely. I'm thinking specifically of if you boil vegetables, you're actually going to probably end up boiling out most of the nutrients in it's thinking green and leafy vegetables, right? Parboiling it, blanching them quickly, that's one thing. But if you turn your spinach into boiled sad slop, there won't be much left in the spinach. So there's different kinds of cooking methods that are good at preserving the nutrients while removing the anti-nutrients. It's a balance, man. It's hard. It's hard to actually eat nutritionally, densely, and healthy without doing a lot of damage to our bodies in the process. Okay, let's see what we have here. Yes.
Sorry if you've answered this 100 times, but do your clothes and activities tend to come from the same place and time, or do you jump around and or mix elements from different places and times?
That's a great question. Do I tend to do things from the same place and time, or jump around and mix elements?
Jump around.
I do enjoy jumping around. But when I jump around, I try to stay true to what I'm wearing. So by which I mean, for instance, ideally, if I were going to explore, the reason I'm wearing Italian today because we're doing some Italian recipes, and we ended up doing some English recipes too. But I try to kind of stick at least to the same time period if I can. Cooking becomes a little more challenging because I enjoy exploring so many different recipes from so many different cultures and times that I just don't have the clothing for all of them. I just don't. Ideally, I would love to have an outfit from every period of history, from every culture. That would be splendid. But I'm a mortal and I don't have a lot of time. I focus most of my research on at least on European side of living history. I focus most of my activities and research on the 15th century. I try, if I have an outfit, then the outfit is entirely one thing, right? So this outfit, everything about this outfit is entirely 1480 Florence, right? So I'm not going to mix and match like time periods and clothing, but I might wear my 1580 Florence outfit and eat a dish from England in 1390. Like, for instance, we just made. But if there's a difference between what I might do in like a demonstration, a live stream like this, and what I would do in a living history setting. If I'm in a living history setting and especially if I'm demonstrating something to the public, then I will want to keep everything authentic to that time and place. Yeah. It's a good
Christina
question.
Gordon has to go.
Okay, Christina, thank you for joining us. Well, that's okay.
Subscribe and hit the bell if you want to
Yeah.
see us again.
Yeah. So don't forget to subscribe. And guys, you might, if you want to actually be notified when I do things like go live, you not only do you have to click the bell, but you have to check and make sure that all are ticked, because the option all is ticked, because if you don't, then YouTube will notify you when things happen that it thinks you want, not what you necessarily want. And also YouTube resets the notification settings randomly, because why not? Okay, so our beans ifrid are done. Ostensibly, just going to serve this up. Okay, it's not going to look very pretty, everyone. So I should specify, this was with a very high ratio of onions to beans. Now, I could try making again and have a lower ratio. Also, if I'd used smaller onions, the parboiling would have had a much bigger effect on it. I already added the poudre douce. Now, the interesting thing is that salt is not mentioned anywhere there. However, salt was always served at the table. So even if you don't cook with salt, salt was placed in a cellar, on a fine cellar like this. This is a replica 15th century salt cellar. Nice, isn't it? This is by Todd's Workshop, Todd Cutler. Very beautiful piece. I love this thing, right? So salt would be placed on the table and you could salt your food at will. And there's actually a big debate in the medieval cooking community as to whether cooks cooked with salt, even when the recipes almost never call for salt, if it's just a question of cooks knowing that you need to cook with salt, and no one would tell a cook to cook with salt because everyone does it. It's something that doesn't require space in an expensive handwritten book like an illuminated manuscript cooking manual. But adding salt at table, 100% authentic. So don't let anyone tell you that they didn't eat salt in their food. Salt drove the world's economy for thousands of years. So
Gingerbread House said, very cool, thanks. This top, probably not the right word, is stunning. It's actually a whole dress.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, this is actually a whole dress. I'm wearing an apron. This is called a cotta in 15th century Florentine Italian, Tuscan Italian. And this is basically, if I were going to actually go outside and do something, I should put on another layer over top of this, a very decorative layer. But I'm a lady of the house cooking with you all. And so, of course, I'm not wearing the fancy top layer. Thank you, though.
Did they use black pepper? John McGann.
Yes, good question. Black pepper. Pepper and ginger are two of the most common spices in the medieval period. They're also some of the most expensive spices. Pepper was exceedingly expensive. So pepper was something that would have only been accessible to the wealthy, to the people at the top level of society. Your average peasants probably wouldn't have had access to pepper, except on very special occasions. I'm talking like Christmas feast, that kind of special occasion. But yeah, black pepper, absolutely, 100%. And that's why chili peppers actually got the name in English chili pepper, because the closest mouth experience that Europeans had to chilies was black pepper. And if you think about it, if you bite into a black peppercorn, especially a relatively fresh one, if you just bite into a whole peppercorn, think about how that actually feels. It burns. So you can see how that you can make the shift easily from these chilis coming out of Mesoamerica being brought over and thinking, well, this is kind of like pepper, so we'll call it chili peppers, right?
It's like that medieval Polish dictionary that says everyone knows what a horse is. They're a horse.
Right.
I do love that.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have traditional Indian saris?
I do have a couple of saris, actually, but I don't have the rest of the outfit. So, you need more than just the sari. You also need the choli and all the layers. I don't have any of the other layers.
There you go, Haas.
Okay. So, here we go. This is delicious. This is really delicious. I think it definitely needs more poudre douce, but it's super yummy. 10 out of 10 would recommend. Yeah, really yum. Beans if fried for the win. Okay. Handsome, question? No?
There's a debate about you doing medieval sci-fi.
Medieval sci-fi is do you count Arthurian romances as fantasy or sci-fi?
They never go to space, so that's fantasy.
I guess that's true.
We
Okay.
Nights in space.
Well, everyone, I did want to do 2 more dishes, but we are at the 4-hour mark or more. I don't know. I've lost all sense of perspective. Yeah, we're almost at the 4-hour mark. So it's almost 11 o'clock p.m. my time, and I've been awake since 6. So are there any final questions or comments? Just to recap what we have done today, we had a very successful fritter called Petit Pernod from the early 15th century in England. This fritter is made with currants and dates and ginger and egg yolk wrapped in a thin paste, and then we baked it, and then we fried it in tallow, and it turned out oh so perfectly. Then we made the nigella soup, which nigella is black seed, in the almond milk infused with saffron, and I determined that the ratio of almond milk to nigella seed would have to be pretty damned high for this to be good. Then we capped it off with Beines ifried, this yummy, yummy refried bean dish from the court of Richard II of England. Super delicious. And this is actually minus the poudre douce. Everything else would have been accessible across all levels of society. So if you take away the expensive powder blend and maybe just replace it with some powdered herbs, right? This would absolutely be something that a peasant or any member of society could have eaten. Right, could have afforded to make on a regular basis, in fact. Okay, any final questions, everyone?
Sarah February says, your skin is very clear. What are your tips? I don't even think you're wearing any makeup.
I'm not wearing any makeup. I don't wear makeup. It's too much hassle. It's too much time. I don't have time for that garbage. But also, so one of the reasons I don't wear makeup also is because we live in such an artificial world. And I don't use filters. There's no glamour filter on this. What you see is what you get. This is me. And I want to represent authenticity in everything that I do, including my person. So this is me unfiltered, and I mean that in every sense of that term. So yeah, tips for good, clean skin, good, clear skin. Wash your face regularly with something that doesn't strip the oils out of your skin. Moisturize moisturize. Wear mineral sunblock all the time, and a sun hat and a parasol. I have a morning facial routine and an evening facial routine. And I use moisturizers and skin products that are natural instead of filled with all kinds of fillers and synthetic scaries. So yeah, also I eat a lot of fresh fruits and vegetables, and a lot of nutrient dense foods. So I'm very careful with what I eat, and I exercise a lot. I'm very, very physically active. So I think that probably all kind of plays in together, probably. Yeah, but don't forget the sunblock.
A lot of the other comments, lots of people saying that they enjoyed the live so much and they're glad they caught it. Tanya gifted a membership out.
Oh, thank you, Tanya, for sharing that. Yeah. So for those who might want to support my medieval living history journey of sharing and knowledge and exploration, then consider becoming a patron on Patreon or a channel member here on YouTube. And that comes with a whole host of extra perks, extra content, I have a private Creative Contessa Discord server where we chat and we share extra resources and we learn from each other. And, there's just full tutorials that I give access to my channel members and my patrons. There's all kinds of unedited footage where you can really see truly the real process of getting dressed in the Middle Ages without any editing, with all of the little sharp jokes that my damsels and I make, for instance, extra dance tutorials, crafting tutorials, all kinds of extra content for my supporters. So if you would like access to that, consider becoming a patron on Patreon or a channel member. I think someone asked me once, which one is better? I keep way more of the money from Patreon than I do from YouTube. YouTube takes like a 30%, 30 or 50, something crazy. They take like a 30 or 50% cut of the channel memberships. Isn't that nice? Patreon, I only lose like 12%. So.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, Thomas.
Hmm.
He thought it was going to be at 10 p.m. last night, but we pushed it to.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. I had to change the time. I did not sleep well. And so this morning, yeah, I apologize for the change in time. When I woke up this morning, I could barely get out of bed. I was so tired. So there was definitely no way I was going to successfully prosecute a live stream. Sorry about that. Yeah. The thing about live streaming is that it really requires energy, and not just the creative part of thinking about all of this, but also engaging in a way that feels lively and not like I'm some kind of zombie. Yeah. Okay. Any final questions, anyone? Let me think what else we've got going on. Today is Sunday. Today is Sunday, my time. No, that's next week. That's been pushed back to next week. There will be, Wednesday morning, my time, Tuesday evening, your time, there will be the Medieval Buzz with Philip from Irish Medieval History. We will once more be discussing all the greatest news in the medieval history world and answering your questions about medieval history, about medieval material culture. So feel free to tune into that format. It's always a good time. Philip and I always have a lot of interesting things to say to each other, and we love hearing from you and answering your questions as well. Oh, wow. Thank you, John. That's super generous of you. Really appreciate that. Thank you. Just got a super chat. Yeah. And then next weekend, throughout the week, again, hit your notification bell, because I do random medieval sewing party live streams, medieval crafting live streams, medieval story times, sometimes when I'm out and about in the world and I'm feeling inspired to share that time with you. So those don't get scheduled in advance. They just kind of happen. Like last night's medieval story time. If you missed it, I recommend you go and check it out. It was a good one. We actually talked about the nightingale, the story the story of La Ustique, the nightingale. It's a very short 12th century story, but it's poignant and it's a little bit hard to read, but I can recommend it. Okay, everyone.
Don't forget to mention the shop.
Oh, yes, right. Yes. So some of you have been asking me about the items on my person and where you can buy them. Jewelry is made by Armor and Castings. And did you tag this one specifically?
Not that one
Okay.
specifically.
There are some of these pieces have been tagged in my shop. I don't know, I guess we call it the shop, my Creative Contessa YouTube channel shop. You can get one of these kerchiefs. They're available for sale from some of the Etsy sellers that I've partnered with. And I do, if that's another way to support the channel, because I do get a percentage if you purchase any of those items. But I only tag things that I believe in, and I don't tag garbage because I don't believe in garbage and I don't believe in mass consumerism. So there's replica medieval clothing that I've tagged. There's accessories like cool replica oil lamps, fabrics from which you can make your own garments. Some of the teas I really love, like I love Harney and Sons teas, and also some of the spices from places like Frontier Co-op, which is where I source a lot of my spices and teas as well. Okay, everyone. Well, I appreciate you all being part of the community. Thank you all for asking all the great questions that you have.
And I play the lute occasionally.
Yes, that's true. And also, my condottiero should be doing more live lute practices where he practices his lute for about an hour. And you can tune in for that and be part of his growth journey as he improves in his lute playing. Well, everyone, otherwise, I thank you all for being part of my community and supporting me in all the ways that you do, whether it's financially, as John and Tanya and Aaron, and I think Autumn also earlier, and Takeda and Han, or just are always here in the live chat asking the good questions, hitting the like. I appreciate all the ways that you have decided to be part of this journey. And I look forward to seeing you next time, everyone. Until then, may your learning be creative. Good night, everyone.
Good night.